Chapter 387. Now that the matters on Daiyu Island were settled, Chun-Shi's life returned to normal. The life of an ordinary person. Naturally, it was dull and repetitive. Nian spent most of her time in kindergarten, so the tea house was fully taken care of by Qiao Yuan. Qiao Yuan graduated from the best university in Huaxia, so a small tea house was not a problem for her. College students nowadays were very smart. Perhaps it was because Qiao Yuan had been living with Chun-Shi's family for a long time, so under the influence of Chun-Shi's family, Qiao Yuan looked more mature. She was very smart and knew what to listen to and what not to listen to. She also knew what to ask and what not to ask. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. In Qiao Yuan's eyes, Chun-Shi's family was a hidden expert. Therefore, she did not know when it started, but there was a slight change in her thinking. In the past, Qiao Yuan was just an ordinary college student who had gone astray. She did not have any plans for the future. She always felt that after she graduated, she would find a suitable job according to her major. But now, Qiao Yuan did not want to live the rest of her life like this. Although Chun-Shi's family was always thinking about where to go and play, they did not set a good example for her at all. But under her rich imagination, she was able to completely fill in the background of Chun-Shi and her husband. The boss and lady boss, they were the modern version of Yonghua and Xiao Longnu. They had seen the prosperity of the world, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, but in the end, they resolutely chose to retreat from the turbulence and live a seemingly ordinary, but happy and stable life with their loved ones. This was Qiao Yuan's dream, and also her role model in life. It was just that Chun-Shi's family had reached the end, while she had just started. Qiao Yuan was in her 4th year of university this year, and her mind was gradually becoming more active. In fact, not to mention Chun-Shi's family, even the retired old man Gu Lao was not simple. Although the two brothers looked like losers all day long, in fact, the moment they were born, they were already rich second-generation heirs. After all, the two of them had a courtyard house in Hohai. It was very valuable. The little girl's mind was active, and she didn't know what Chun-Shi was busy with recently, so the responsibility of playing chess and chatting with Gu Lao naturally fell on her shoulders. Needless to say, this old man and young man actually got along quite well. Although Gu Lao didn't specifically teach Qiao Yuan anything, this little girl would always inadvertently learn things that couldn't be learned in school. Qiao Yuan was accumulating herself, just like the sweeping monks in the scripture depository. When she decided to leave the small tea house, it was time for her to set sail and usher in her brilliant life. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Like a sponge, Qiao Yuan studied and improved herself crazily, while Gu Lao enjoyed the rest of his life. Qin Ring was in closed-door cultivation all day long, and Chun-Shi rarely showed up except to take the 3 children to and from school, because Chun-Shi was busy with something important, a very, very big thing. For this, after Chun-Shi sent Nian to school every day, he had to cross the entire Pacific Ocean and go to the United States, which was far away on the other side of the ocean. Of course, Chun-Shi didn't go to the United States for fun, but for work. The Adumbra flower was so precious. Naturally, it couldn't be refined with an ordinary iron basin. And Chun-Shi didn't have enough materials to refine a new alchemy furnace, so refining the Adumbra flower became a big problem. So after thinking about it, Chun-Shi finally decided to use the power of nature to refine the elixir. That was heaven and earth as the furnace, nature as the work, yin and yang as the charcoal, all things as the copper. Therefore, the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park was his first choice. The so-called supervolcano was a large-scale eruption volcano that could change the world's weather after eruption and even threaten human beings. Yellowstone Park was once the world's largest national park, and Yellowstone Volcano was the world's largest supervolcano. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it wasn't a supervolcano, so it didn't have the qualifications to enter Chun-Shi's consideration. Refining elixir was a very complicated thing. The energy cultivation elixir that he refined in the past was actually rubbish, so Chun-Shi didn't care at all. Now that he finally had the best ingredients, Chun-Shi naturally had to pay 120% attention. configuring the prescription, screening the ingredients, analyzing the medicinal properties, choosing the furnace, and so on. After doing all this preliminary work, Chunshi could officially start refining the elixir. This day, December 1st, Shangjing had just welcomed the first snow, but Yellowstone Park was already covered in snow. Looking around, the dense pine forests rose and fell, and the rolling mountains were covered in morning fog. Animal footprints crisscrossed the snowy plains, and hot springs rose and fell one after another. Because the world's largest supervolcano was buried below, Yellowstone Park had a wonderful scenery that was difficult to see in other places during winter. When the warm water vapor sprayed into the cold air, the water molecules would instantly solidify into a rain of small ice pellets, forming an extremely rare geothermal fountain. So what kind of park was this? It was simply a paradise on Earth. Yellowstone Park covered an area of up to 9,000 square kilometers, one-third larger than Zhonghai's 6,000 square kilometers. Because of the need to close off the mountains to cultivate forests, the park would be completely closed at the end of October and would only reopen in mid-December. During this time, only a few scenic spots could be visited. Therefore, when Chunshi arrived at the park, there was not a single tourist in the huge park. This was not the first time he had been here. After the volcanic eruption cooled down, it would produce hard and impermeable basalt. After rainfall, it would generally produce a large lake. Therefore, the crater of Yellowstone Park was not protruding like Mount Fuji, but hidden under Yellowstone Lake. It could even be said that the entire Yellowstone Park was located on the crater of the volcano. Chunshi plunged into Yellowstone Lake, then followed the tunnel he had previously dug and quickly flew underground. The reason why it was called a supervolcano was because there was a magma reservoir with a diameter of 70 kilometers and a thickness of about 10 kilometers below the crater. In fact, a volcano was like a pressure cooker. Once the internal temperature rose to a certain level, the magma inside would instantly erupt. Chunshi set up a restriction in the magma reservoir. Then he put all the medicinal herbs he had collected during this period of time inside, such as the dumbra flower, bloodthorn grass, ginseng flowers, and all kinds of precious medicinal herbs that could be found in the world. Rare and precious treasures were produced from the earth, with the calcination and extraction of the underground fire essence, coupled with the continuous washing of the spirit energy of heaven and earth. The medicinal properties of the medicinal herbs could be released most effectively. Chunshi used the restriction to bind the medicinal properties and continuously quenched and compressed them together. The released medicinal properties would gradually change from a gaseous state to a liquid state, and finally to a solid state. When the medicinal herbs were exhausted, it was time for the elixir to be produced. What was the most important thing in alchemy? It was neither the medicinal herbs nor the technique. It was the last step before the elixir was formed. Because this was not an ordinary Chinese medicine, the moment the elixir was produced, it was like forcibly opening the lid of the pressure cooker. Boiling hot steam would instantly rush out. What Chunshi had to do was to smoothly take the elixir out of the furnace from this boiling hot steam. It sounded very simple. But what if the steam was replaced with the spirit energy of heaven and earth? The dumbra flower's grade was very high, and the elixir it produced was at least a 9th grade elixir. Thus, the accumulation of more than 3,000 years would completely erupt the moment the furnace was opened, along with the elixir. If Chunshi did not immediately take the elixir and use a secret technique to bind the elixir, then the medicinal properties of the elixir would rapidly dissipate, turning back into spirit energy and dissipating into heaven and earth. And precisely because of this, when cultivators refined high-grade elixirs, they would usually use a high-grade alchemy furnace. On one hand, it was to extract the medicinal properties more effectively. On the other hand, it was for safety reasons, using the alchemy furnace to resist the impact of the elixir when it was produced. Chunshi did not have an alchemy furnace, so he could only do it himself. This was a battle. It was a battle between Chunshi and the elixir. If he could not successfully take the elixir from the sudden explosion of spirit energy, if it was light, the elixir would be destroyed, and if it was heavy, Chapter 388. The interior of the volcano might be different from what many people imagined. It was hollow like an iron box, and it was filled with boiling magma. The so-called magma was actually a silicate substance that had melted into a molten state due to high temperature. It would show different colors according to the temperature. The higher the temperature, the lighter the color. Under the illumination of the flames, the magma reservoir buried under Yellowstone Park was a colorful underground world. In addition to the red magma, the magma reservoir was mainly red and yellow. The yellow was sulfur, and the red was iron. In addition, there was a black substance at the top of the magma reservoir. This black substance was the surface of the rock formed by the cooling of the gas. Yellowstone Park's supervolcano would erupt once every 600,000 years. The last time was about 630,000 years ago. Therefore, this supervolcano had entered the eruption cycle and could erupt at any time. Scientists had used computers to simulate the eruption. Once the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park erupted, 90% of the people within 1,000 kilometers would not be spared. Most of them would die from inhaling the volcanic ash, which would cause their lungs to solidify. In other words, most of the United States would become a land of death. There was no chance of survival. After the eruption, the volcanic ash that was spewed out by the magma would drift to every corner of the earth within 2 days. Then, the nuclear winter would arrive. The thick volcanic ash would cover most of the world. Sunlight would not be able to reach the earth. A large number of animals and plants would begin to die, and black acid rain would cover the entire world. This process would last for at least 3 to 6 months. In other words, once the supervolcano erupted, not only would the United States suffer, but the entire world would fall into a food crisis. The disaster movie 2012 had already shown this point. After all, Chun-Shi was not a geologist. Therefore, when he chose the location of the pill refinement, he only focused on finding the largest volcano and did not consider other problems at all. The refinement of the pill had reached the final stage. Chun-Shi floated at the top of the magma reservoir. The ball of light directly below him was the heaven and earth furnace that he had set up. In addition, he had even set up a spirit gathering formation here. With Yellowstone Park as the center, all the spirit energy within 100 miles flowed into it, so that the entire magma reservoir was filled with rich spirit energy of heaven and earth. It was like a balloon that had been stretched to its limit and could explode at any time. Lava surged and earth fire raged. Heaven and earth were the furnace, and spiritual energy was the charcoal. Under the continuous burning of the earth fire, the medicinal properties of the Adumbra flower were completely unleashed. Once the spirit pill was formed, the restriction would fall apart, and the compressed spirit chi of heaven and earth would explode in an instant. Its intensity would not be inferior to a large-scale spirit chi tide. In fact, it was even more ferocious and surging than the tide of spiritual energy. At the same time, it was also more threatening. Chun-Shi waited patiently, focusing all his attention on the ball of light. Suddenly, a slight cracking sound came from the top of the magma chamber. Crack! It was a very weak sound. Before Chun-Shi could react, the faint cracking noise had turned into a series of loud, rumbling noises. The earth seemed to be torn apart. Immediately afterward, the volcanic passage that had been deposited for hundreds of thousands of years came alive again. The strong air pressure continued to rise, trying to find a way to vent. The mountain could not withstand the pressure, and huge cracks began to appear, spreading all the way to the surface at an extremely fast speed. The cracks grew bigger and more numerous. Countless huge rocks continued to fall from above. The moment the huge rocks smashed into the magma below, the magma boiled, and sparks flew everywhere. Chun-Shi was stunned. Until this moment, he didn't even realize what a terrible thing he was doing. The earth began to tremble. Under the pressure, countless cracks appeared on the inside of the mountain. The cracks reached the surface. In an instant, countless geothermal fountains erupted from Yellowstone Park at the same time. Because the temperature was too high, the snow on the surface began to sublimate, turning from a solid to a gas in an instant. A thick fog shrouded the park. At the same time, Earthquake alarms sounded in several cities around Yellowstone Park. The tremors grew stronger and stronger. This was not an earthquake, but the supervolcano had begun to become active. Under the pressure, the weak surface of the earth began to bulge, undulating strangely like waves. Birds cried out and beasts howled. Countless animals ran out of the park, and flocks of birds flew across the sky, blotting out the sun. The only thing worth celebrating was it was probably because Yellowstone Park was not open to tourists during this period of time. This place was freezing cold. Other than a few park staff, there are not many people. Chun-Shi was inside the magma chamber, so he could see more clearly. He saw the mountain collapse. He also saw the magma boiling. Originally, he came to pick up the medicine happily, but he did not expect to witness a volcanic eruption with his own eyes. Chun-Shi finally realized the seriousness of the matter. But just as he was about to find a way to contain the volcanic eruption, the elixir came out of the furnace without warning. The sudden burst of spiritual energy forced him to take a few steps back. Seeing this, Chun-Shi could not help but let out a long howl and immediately rushed toward the ball of light. It was not easy to wait for the elixir to come out of the furnace. If he really failed at this time, wouldn't he be depressed to death? The spiritual energy turned into gusts of wind, like sharp blades, constantly slapping Chun-Shi's body. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled at this moment, he could only barely withstand the pressure and then slowly approach the elixir. The elixir was quietly suspended in the middle of the cave. It was like a luminous pearl shining brightly. After such a long time of extraction, the medicinal properties were fully displayed. As soon as it came out, the magma chamber was filled with a refreshing smell. Just taking a deep breath of the aroma would make one feel refreshed and refreshed. The elixir was right in front of him. Thinking of the efficacy of this elixir, even Chun-Shi could not help but feel a little excited. As long as he took this elixir, then Ying would step into the diviner realm and condense the golden elixir. In a moment of excitement, Chun-Shi also used all his strength, and a burst of true essence energy instantly erupted from his body, not inferior to the spiritual energy tide. The energy was like a sharp knife, leading Chun-Shi all the way to the elixir. However, with every step he took, a layer of true essence in his body would be consumed. Finally, Chun-Shi flew near the elixir. The moment his fingers touched the elixir, the surging spiritual energy in the magma chamber seemed to have heard the call, and all of it converged into the elixir. The pressure suddenly disappeared. However, before Chun-Shi had time to be happy, the boiling magma below was like a fountain, and it suddenly spewed up into the sky. Why did the volcano not erupt? That was because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth filled the cave, and thus the magma was firmly pressed in the magma chamber. Once Chun-Shi took the elixir, the magma that had lost its suppression would be like a dam bursting, and it would spray out more fiercely and violently than before. This was an explosive volcanic eruption. From afar, it looked like a supernuclear bomb had been dropped in Yellowstone Park. First, a burst of strong light lit up the sky. Immediately after, a gigantic mushroom cloud slowly rose. At the same time as the mushroom cloud rose, there were countless bolts of lightning shuttling back and forth. The angry volcano spewed magma and thick smoke, and ferocious electric snakes hissed in the air. This was not a movie, but a joint performance of the sky and the earth, volcanic lightning. Chapter 389. The supervolcano erupted. At that moment, the entire world seemed to have quieted down. The crater of the volcano was like a lit-up firework. First, it emitted a cloud of smoke that covered the sky. Then it suddenly exploded into the sky. In an instant, a mushroom cloud formed by volcanic ash and steam rose into the sky, almost breaking through the clouds. Dark red magma spewed out along with the billowing black smoke. The red-hot rocks were pushed into the sky and exploded like fireworks, then fell in all directions. From afar, it looked like thousands of meteors had passed by, leaving streaks of fiery red marks in the sky. At the same time, The shock waves that accompanied the explosion spread out wave after wave. Countless boulders were blown away by the strong wind, and countless trees were uprooted. The accumulated snow on the ground turned into white smoke and drifted in all directions. At that moment, all living things cried out, and the plants bowed their heads. Because sound traveled the slowest, after the shock waves exploded, the loud rumbling sound began to spread out in all directions. The entire earth was shaking violently. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano. Black smoke filled the sky, and hot flames swallowed a large area of land. This was the anger of nature. All living things were destined to be doomed, and could only helplessly fall into this terrible disaster. This scene, it must be the so-called, the birth of a drought demon. Thousands of miles of land were barren. Starving people were everywhere, and not even a blade of grass grew. Chun-Shi turned into a golden light and flew out of the thick smoke. When he saw the scene in front of him, he finally realized what he had done. The huge Yellowstone Park had become a purgatory. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, spreading out wave after wave. Magma spread all over the ground like a bright red wound, and blood was gushing out. This was definitely an accident. Chun-Shi looked at the scene in front of him, dumbfounded. After he came back to his senses, he began to think about how to remedy the situation. After all, he was not a patriot. Although the United States was annoying, the people of the United States were innocent. Chun-Shi's worldview was not so twisted and dark. How to remedy it? This was really a problem. Volcanic eruptions were not short-lived, but rather a continuous process. Once this hole was opened, magma would continuously gush out from the ground. This would last for at least a few hours, at most a few days, or even a few years. Rain could not extinguish a volcano. This was because volcanoes were not only found on land. There were also volcanoes under the sea. Even the sea could not extinguish a volcano, let alone a few heavy rains. Chun-Shi looked at the crater with a worried expression. After thinking for a long time, he finally came up with the simplest and most violent method, and that was he directly blocked the volcanic crater. Just like the pressure cooker, wouldn't the problem be solved once the lid was put back on? This restriction didn't even need to be too exquisite. It just needed to be hard and strong enough to withstand the pressure from the magma reservoir. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi immediately began to work hard to arrange. As long as they acted quickly, they might be able to save many lives before the magma spread to the nearby cities. While Chun-Shi was busy cleaning up the mess, Karakoram, this was a place Chun-Shi was very familiar with. However, this place hid many secrets that no one knew about. It was cold here. Other than the snowy mountains that had not melted for thousands of years, there was only the blue sky and white clouds. There were many mountains here. After climbing over a tall mountain, one would see countless tall mountains. Above the white snow, in the middle of the vast mountain range, there was a seemingly ordinary 10,000-year-old snow mountain. It was not high enough, nor was it dangerous enough. In addition to this remote terrain, it did not even have a widely spread name. It was just the most inconspicuous mountain among the vast mountains. However, 10,000 years ago, it also had a very beautiful name, which was Floating Mist Mountain. The green grass could be waves, and the blue sea could be dust. The green hills could be turned into a flowing ocean, and the sea could also be turned into the land where dust had settled. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The glory of Floating Mist Mountain had turned to dust with time. The current Floating Mist Mountain was probably just a barren snowy mountain. But today, however, this barren snowy mountain welcomed an uninvited guest, Jiang Yin. In fact, since the moment Wushu attacked Daiyu Island, there was no such person as Jiang Fengyin in this world. A 20-year-old body and a 1,000-year-old soul. After a month of recuperation, Jiang Yin had completely adapted to this body. So with every movement he made, his body naturally exuded a weather-beaten feeling. Jiang Yin stepped on the snow and walked slowly, step by step. It was like an ant walking on a painting. Although it was small, it was very obvious. It seemed that this was not the first time Jiang Yin had come here. But perhaps because it had been too long, He would stop and look around after a few steps to make sure that he did not take the wrong path. He did not fly, but walked slowly on the snow. But as he walked, Jiang Yan's figure actually disappeared in a thin air just like that, because he walked into a formation. The instant he stepped into the array formation, a passageway appeared before Jiang Yan's eyes. Jiang Yan did not even hesitate and walked straight into the tunnel. There was no light source in the tunnel. It was pitch black. But Jiang Yan had no intention of lighting a light at all. He continued to walk forward without stopping. He did not know how far he had walked before a faint light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Seeing this, a faint smile immediately appeared on Jiang Yan's face. At the end of the tunnel was a hall. There was only a faint green light source inside. From afar, it looked like a will-o'-the-wisp. It wandered in the hall while emitting a dim light. The moment Jiang Yan stepped into the hall, an old voice sounded in the hall. Who's here? It's me, Jiang Yan. The young man's voice was good. The energetic voice suddenly formed a sharp contrast with a lifeless voice. And as soon as Jiang Yan's voice fell, the hall that had been silent for a long time seemed to come alive again. Jiang Yan, Jiang Yan, Jiang Yan. Countless different voices sounded in every corner of the hall. Just like the many spectators sitting around, the moment they saw Jiang Yan appear, they cheered in unison. But these voices sounded like the voices of dried corpses. It was dry and shriveled, and at the same time, it was a bit harsh and hoarse. Jiang Yan seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. After a while, he raised his arms and signaled for everyone to be quiet. The cheers stopped abruptly. At this time, Jiang Yan faced the center of the hall and said slowly, "I'm sure you all know what's going on outside, so now I just want to ask, the oath back then, is it still valid now?" After that, Jiang Yan began to look around, but no one answered him. The entire hall was silent. It was quiet and empty. It was as if he was the only living person in the room. Jiang Yan stood in the center of the hall and waited silently. After a long while, the old voice sounded again. "How can the oath of the 9 serenities be taken lightly? Since you have decided to come out, we will not continue to endure here. Go ahead and make the arrangements. If there's no doubt, I am willing to respect Jiang Yan as the co-leader of the 9 serenities and lead us to fight against Tiandu. Do you have any objections?" As soon as this question was asked, there was a sound of agreement in the hall. Seconded, seconded, seconded. Just like the company's board of directors, Jiang Yan was officially elected as the new CEO of the 9 serenities. There were 9 levels of heaven and 9 levels of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 serenities below. The 2 words, 9 serenities, were the fundamental reason why Jiang Yan dared to go against Tiandu. For this, he was even willing to sacrifice the entire Jiang family and offer up all the remaining celestials on Daiyu Island for the 9 serenities to take. Because what he wanted. Chapter 390. After Chun, she busied himself for half a day. The mess in Yellowstone Park was finally cleaned up. For this reason, he specially set up a super large restriction to completely seal the magma reservoir. In fact, this could be regarded as a blessing in disguise. After Chun-Chi's messing around, part of the pressure on the Yellowstone Park supervolcano had been removed. Coupled with the effect of the restriction, the next natural eruption of this volcano was estimated to be tens of thousands of years later. If the United States knew the truth of this matter, they would probably only be grateful to Chun-Chi and would worship him as their ancestor. It was just a short eruption. Although the scale was large, the destructive power was always limited. The only thing that was painful to lose was probably the beautiful natural scenery of Yellowstone Park. Even if they immediately began to rebuild it, it would take many years to form an ecological chain of today's scale. Of course, these losses were not for Chun-Chi to worry about. He had done what he could and made up for what he could. Therefore, after carefully checking the restriction, Chun-Chi happily took the spirit pill and embarked on the return journey. Perhaps because he was in a good mood, during the flight to Huaxia, he took out the spirit pill from time to time to observe it. Just a whiff of this fragrant scent was enough to make one intoxicated. Although the grade of this spirit pill was not as high as he imagined, it could barely reach the 6th or 7th grade. After all, the supplementary ingredients were just some ordinary medicinal materials. It was already very good to be able to reach this standard. And with the current conditions on Earth, how could Chun-Shi not be satisfied with the fact that such a high-grade spirit pill could be refined? Humans should always be content with what they have. Refining pills was a craft, and it could not be done without some experience. Refining pills, according to a recipe, was something that only a worker would do. With Chun-Shi's years of experience, coupled with his understanding of medicinal materials and pharmacology, he could naturally configure a prescription that was really suitable for the current situation based on the existing materials. Therefore, this spirit pill was absolutely unique. It didn't even have a name. Even if one searched the entire Heavenly J domain, they wouldn't be able to find a second one. Naturally, the naming rights fell to Chun-Shi. However, he didn't have any fancy ideas at all. He didn't even bother to come up with a name. He directly began to think about how to divide up the spirit pills. There was only one spirit pill, but it could be divided into several portions. He cut it in half and gave the other half to Ying. The remaining half will be divided into 3 parts, one for him and one for Nian. Then, the last portion would be cut in half. One half would be given to his father-in-law, and the other half would be given to Madame Jiang. His sister-in-law had already eaten the heaven and earth treasure before, so she had indigestion. Therefore, Chun-Shi directly ignored Qin Shiweching this time. As for Big Cat and Big Head, their cultivation levels were too low, so it was enough for them to eat some energy cultivation pills. Thinking of this, a name suddenly popped up in Chun-Shi's mind. Lin Xian. After such a long time, Lin Xian should have stepped into the middle stage of the Qi refinement realm, right? Should he cut Madame Zhang's portion in half and give half to her? Chun-Shi seriously thought about this problem. As he thought about it, he unknowingly returned to Shangjing. During this period of time, as long as he sent Nian to school, Chun-Shi would immediately go home to accompany Qin Ruoying to cultivate. Since he was already out today, why not go to school and see how Nian's class looked like? Therefore, Chun-Shi immediately turned around and flew toward Donghua Gate Kindergarten. Nian's class today was really interesting. It was a theme class. The content of the theme was My Mom and Dad. This was the most common class in kindergartens. It was mainly to guide children to understand themselves and others correctly, to develop a close and cooperative attitude toward others and society, and to learn the preliminary interpersonal skills. Since the correct child wanted to get to know others, the first thing to do was to start with the people around the child, which was their parents. That was why today's class was held. Previously, the teacher had already taught the children how to draw a family portrait, so today they picked up their own painting and introduced their family members to everyone in turn. The content of the class was actually quite simple. It was nothing more than the teacher asking questions and the children standing up to answer. Of course, the questions were also very simple. For example, who is the person in the painting? What does it have to do with you? Is it good for you? What do they like to do the most? The children stood up one by one to answer. Chun-Shi hid outside the classroom and listened to every word with great interest. Finally, it was Nian's turn to stand up. The little girl did not have stage fright at all. She pointed at the person in the painting and answered the teacher's questions generously. When the teacher asked her, "What does Dad like to do the most?" the little thing opened its mouth and replied, "Daddy loves to cook the most. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad's cooking." Then do you like Dad's cooking more? Or do you like Dad more? After the teacher threw out a question that she hadn't asked before, the little girl was stunned on the spot. She didn't seem to expect the teacher to ask such a question at all. So after hesitating for a moment, the little girl frowned and whispered softly, "I like both. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad." The moment he heard this sentence, the expression on Chun-Shi's face was very rich. So if your father doesn't know how to cook, you won't like him? The little girl's answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't perfect. After the teacher's guidance, she finally realized the importance of her father, so she quickly nodded and affirmed, "Even if Dad's cooking isn't good, I like Dad." Children's words carried no harm. It was actually quite interesting to listen to children talk when they had nothing to do. After the little girl sat down, it was the brothers' turn. Because they were twins, the two of them drew a picture together. The teacher asked questions as usual, but she didn't expect to make a mistake here. And that was, she didn't find out the child's family situation clearly. Therefore, when the teacher casually asked who was the father, the brothers exploded on the spot. We don't have a father. Old Gu didn't teach them this, and the old man wasn't so petty. In fact, it was Gu Yao who taught them this. Perhaps it was because she quarreled with Xia Kaiji when she was alive, so Gu Yao had been holding back her resentment after she died. So she would instill this idea in the brothers from time to time. Of course, they had to listen to what their mother said. So they didn't have a father. When the brothers shouted this sentence in unison, the teacher knew that something bad had happened. Sure enough, as soon as the brothers finished speaking, the other children were surprised and started to talk about it. Teacher, is he a wild child without a father? Mom told me before, if I'm taken away by bad people, then I'll lose my parents and can only become a wild child. Wild child. He's a wild child. Wild child. In recent years, the divorce rate had been increasing, and the impact of parents' divorce on children was definitely the most profound and heavy. This was a sensitive topic. Therefore, the kindergarten teacher paid attention to this issue and even specifically investigated the family situation of each child before entering school. Chenshi didn't think much at that time, and directly said the names of Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao. He never thought that the brothers wouldn't recognize this father at all. Chapter 391. Schools nowadays paid attention to humanized teaching. Whether it was kindergarten, primary school, or secondary school, a qualified teacher would always prevent the children from facing these problems directly. Of course, there were also many retarded teachers who would not care about these details at all. Knowing that there were children in the class who had lost their father at a young age, the teacher still assigned similar essay topics, such as my father, I want to tell you, father's love, and so on. If this was not retarded, then what was? How should the children write? Should they rely on their imagination to make it up? In fact, this was not an essay at all, but a sharp knife inserted into the children's chests. The children were still so young. If they could enlighten and encourage themselves to successfully walk out of their psychological trauma, then all the child psychologists in the world could be fired. According to the education philosophy of Donghua Gate Kindergarten, this kind of situation was absolutely not allowed to happen. Once the principal found out, the teacher would immediately pack up and leave. Therefore, after hearing the brothers shout that they did not have a father, even the teacher was shocked. It was human nature to be exclusive. Most of the children in the class were either rich or respectable. They had lived in different circles since they were young, so naturally, they were more exclusive than ordinary children. Without a father, the brothers were the outliers in the eyes of this group of children. Outliers would always be excluded. When the children shouted, "wild children," for the first time, the brothers were labeled as outliers on their foreheads. Regarding this problem, the brothers were very calm. The two of them stood upright in the middle of the classroom, and there was no intention of avoiding the gaze in their eyes. Because in their eyes, this was the truth. And the facts also proved that they only needed their mother and grandpa. Of course, the brothers did not have much of a reaction, mainly because they had not experienced what Nyin had experienced. They had not been ridiculed and ostracized by children of the same age, so naturally, they did not understand that the words "no father" could not be said casually. The class suddenly became lively. Seeing this, the teacher could only quickly signal for everyone to be quiet. But at this moment, the little girl at the side suddenly flipped out. "Don't talk nonsense." Nyin stood up from her seat and then shouted at the class with righteous indignation. "They are not wild children." The little girl was very angry. On one hand, it was because the two brothers were the closest to her. On the other hand, it was because she had a deeper understanding of the word wild child. She didn't like those three words, so naturally, she wouldn't allow others to say that about her little friend. Wan and Mingming's father is on a business trip. My father used to go on business trips too. He only returned after a very long time. That's why they call me a wild child. Let me tell you, I'm not a wild child. My father is back. He comes to school every day to bring me home. One and Ming Ming's father will come back too. I'm not a wild child. They are not wild children. We are not wild children. While speaking, the little guy suddenly burst into tears. After all, he was still a child. It was not easy for her to defend herself under such circumstances. After Nian Yan's interruption, the teacher finally came back to his senses and immediately comforted her. Then, the teacher used Nian Yan's words and began to guide the children in the class. Everyone's parents were not at home sometimes, so they couldn't be called wild children because of that, right? In order to prevent the two brothers from causing trouble again, the teacher didn't even dare to let them speak again. He directly let them sit back in their seats and play a little game with Nian Yan. When Nian Yan gradually stopped crying, the teacher decisively changed the theme of the day and then led the children to sit on the small train outside the house. There were 3 teachers in a class. The main teacher made such a big mistake, so the teachers in the side class should report it to the principal. But considering that everyone was in the same boat, the teachers in the side class concealed this matter. The small disturbance soon subsided. Nian Yan's little face showed a smile again, but the two brothers' faces showed a thoughtful expression. Perhaps from this moment on, the shadow of their father gradually emerged from the bottom of their hearts. Chun, she was like a bystander, silently watching the whole process. To be honest, when he saw Nian Yan stand up and passionately defend the two brothers, he, as a father, was really shocked. That feeling was hard to describe. In short, Nian Yan's performance today made him very satisfied. He didn't raise his daughter in vain. Dad will always love you, forever and ever. Happy, Chin-Shi called the big cat who had been squatting on the wall pillar and dozing off. Then, he scraped a layer of skin from the elixir and threw it to the big cat. This guy was lying on the school wall every day, doing nothing but sleeping. Today, the leader happened to be inspecting, so he was happy and gave it such a big gift. It was really a blessing from the sky. The big cat happily jumped around Chun-Shi's feet like a dog. Chun-Shi was waiting for the little guy to finish school while thinking about the two brothers. He really had to find time to talk to old Gu. Regardless of the grudge between Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao, the child was innocent. How could he instill such thoughts in the child? This kind of thinking was unacceptable. Chun-Shi was seriously thinking about the child's education, but he didn't notice he hadn't been in seclusion for a long time to seek a breakthrough. He clearly had an epiphany some time ago on Daiyu Island. Now, he only needed to concentrate on seclusion, and the day he came out would be the day he reached insightful emptiness. But even so, Chun-Shi still didn't plan to go into seclusion, because he had to pick up Nian Yan from school every day, cook for Nian Yan, and play with Nian Yan. These trivial matters took up too much of his time and made him live more and more like an ordinary person. The life of an ordinary person was trivial, nothing more than some household chores. He could even do nothing all day, just stay outside Nian Yan's classroom and watch his daughter grow up day by day. Actually, to put it bluntly, in his current state, he didn't deserve to be a cultivator at all. Cultivation didn't just fall from the sky. It had to be accumulated bit by bit. It was also because of this that Qin Xueqing sometimes felt very strange. Did Chun-Shi really not need to cultivate? Nian Yan was very cute. But because of Nian Yan, did he really have to completely give up on cultivation? As a qualified martial arts fanatic, her sister-in-law really didn't understand Chun-Shi's approach. So, she also talked to Chun-Shi. In this regard, Chun-Shi's attitude was more resolute than she imagined. Nian Yan was indeed more important than cultivation. If he had to choose between Nian Yan and cultivation, Chun-Shi would also choose the former without hesitation. You say it's trivial, but I say it's deep and meaningful. Probably only Chun-Shi himself could understand the meaning behind it. You're under too little pressure. This was the last sentence Qin Xueqing said to Chun-Shi before she went into seclusion. Because in her opinion, Chun-Shi was simply a nouveau riche. Once he had a little money, he began to forget himself. He was busy taking the child around all day and didn't care about his own career at all. One had to know that his current stability came from his previous accumulation. Once these accumulations were exhausted, was it going to take the child and sell vegetables on the streets? This was the difference in values. Chapter 392, December 22nd, Winter Solstice. Although this year's winter came late, the snowfall was not much worse than last year's. Snow fell like goose feathers. After a night, a thick layer of snow piled up in the alley. The little guy had been talking about skating all day, but he did not know that the ice rink in Hohai would not open for another month. Everything was the same as usual. After the little guy cuddled with Chun-Shi as usual, he got up and went to school. Chun-Shi stayed behind the wall until he finished watching the little guy do his morning exercises. Then, he slowly strolled back to Dongming Alley like an ordinary person who got up early for a walk. But what was different from usual was Chun-Shi met an acquaintance at the entrance of the alley today. Mr. Chun, long time no see. The person was Jiang Yin. Jiang Yin was wearing a long black down jacket and a gray wool hoodie on his head, hiding his long hair. Jiang Yan's current appearance. He looked no different from the young people you could see on the street. The only difference was that he still had an outstanding temperament that was as deep as the abyss. Why are you here? Chun-Shi never thought that Jiang Yin would come to Shangjing and even find him at his door. So the moment he saw Jiang Yin, he was a little surprised. Could it be that this old guy had been stuck in the soul crystal for too long and wanted to wander around after taking over his body? Actually, it's like this. After I took the elixir you gave me, I realized that this elixir was extraordinary. You must have added a lot of rare herbs in it, right? Jiang Yin laughed. After seeing Chun-Shi extend his hand and make a pleased gesture, he immediately followed Chun-Shi into the courtyard. The visitor was a guest, so he had to at least show some basic courtesy. So, Chun-Shi led Jiang Yin to the main hall and made him a pot of tea. I did add a lot of things, but they're just some common herbs. The most important thing is your adumbra flower. After hearing Chun-Shi's words, Jiang Yin immediately laughed and said, "The Jiang family doesn't have such exquisite alchemy skills like yours." After your careful concoction, this adumbra flower really showed its medicinal effects. If that's the case, the Jiang family has really profited. Jiang Yin seemed very happy. Seeing this, Chun-Shi laughed a few times. She was too lazy to be polite with him. As long as he was happy, it was fine. In fact, after Chun-Shi thought that this elixir would definitely end up in Jiang's stomach, he cut the Jiang family's portion in half and planned to leave the other half for Lin Xian. After all, he should not let the goodies the old man had been hiding in the soul crystal for so many years, so he probably had accumulated a huge amount of vital energy. Thinking about it, this little bit was not too much, and this little bit was not too little. He just had to make do with it. To be honest, based on the amount that Jiang Yin had consumed, it was probably not as effective as directly swallowing the adumbra flower. Therefore, even if Chun-Shi used her, but to think, she knew that the old man must have other motives for coming to her door today. All right, you don't have to be so polite with me. Chun-Shi did not have the time to talk nonsense with him, so he asked directly, "Tell me, why did you come all the way here?" Hearing this, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became even more cheerful. "Ha! Actually, it's nothing much. I just wanted to come out for a walk and pay you a visit." At this point, Jiang Yan's gaze fell on the couplet in the middle of the main hall. "The heavenly gate is broken. The river opens. The jade water flows east." However, his gaze did not linger for long. Then he put on a rather emotional expression and sighed. "White clouds for 1,000 years. The sky is long. Look at this world. Where does it look like it used to? When I came here, I even took that big guy called an airplane. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Now, even mortals can ride the clouds and travel thousands of miles in a day. It's just like what the ancestors said, a day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world. I think it's time for Daiyu Island to change its philosophy. The Jiang family can't always live in the past. We should try to integrate into the present." The old man was a chatterbox, and once he opened his mouth, he would not stop muttering. After listening for a while, Chun-Shi felt a headache coming on, so he found an excuse to send him out. No wonder everyone said that the older a person was, the more long-winded they became. This old man had been holding in for thousands of years. If he really let him continue, wouldn't he talk for 3 days and 3 nights? All right, then I won't disturb you. Have a good rest. I'll go to the Great Wall again, huh? Jiang Yin stood in the alley and waved goodbye to Chun Shi with a smile. After Chun Shi chuckled, he didn't even bother to exchange pleasantries and directly closed the door. Bye-bye to you. Jiang Yin didn't feel offended at all. When he turned and walked out of the alley, there was even a faint smile on his face. After that, Jiang Yin strolled leisurely on the streets, looking around from time to time. He looked like a tourist who had just arrived in the city. However, just as Jiang Yin walked out of the main street, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. Jiang Yin glanced at him and said coldly, "There are people coming and going here. Can't you wait until there's no one before you appear?" Hearing this, that person said indifferently, "They're just a bunch of ants, so what if they see us? They'll only think that their eyes are playing tricks on them." Enough. Jiang Yin seemed to be quite dissatisfied with this person's approach, so his face turned cold on the spot. However, that person still didn't care, but looked around curiously, especially at the complicated structure of the viaduct not far away. If Chun Shi were here, he would definitely feel very puzzled. Since when did Jiang Zhengqing dare to talk to Jiang Yin like this? That's right, the middle-aged man walking side by side with Jiang Yin at this moment was Jiang Zhengqing, who was previously beaten into the ground by Chun Shi. Although Jiang Zhengqing was arrogant and unruly, he was still a member of the Jiang family, and the Jiang family's ancestral teachings had long been branded in his blood and marrow, so naturally, he couldn't be so disrespectful to Jiang Yin. So the person in front of him, it couldn't be Jiang Zhengqing at all. Don't blame me for not warning you. This Mr. Chun isn't someone you can afford to offend. If you want to overthrow Heaven Capital, then you must need his help, and you can't afford to be on bad terms with him. Seeing Jiang Yan's serious look, Jiang Zhengqing also withdrew his previous frivolity and became much more serious. So he replied in a deep voice, "I know." Seeing this, Jiang Yan didn't say anything more. The reason he suddenly came to visit Chun Shi today was to let his companion see Mr. Chen's abilities. Not to mention Mr. Chen's cultivation, it wasn't difficult to see that this person was definitely not someone to be trifled with just by looking at the restrictions inside and outside the 4-part courtyard. Jiang Zhengqing obviously knew his limits. However, after a moment of silence, he couldn't help but ask, "I still feel a little strange. You and I have lived for thousands of years, so why haven't we heard of such a person in the world? Are you so sure he's not from Heaven Capital?" After hearing Jiang Zhengqing's words, Jiang Yin didn't immediately answer, presumably thinking about the reason behind it. After a long while, Jiang Yin frowned and said, "It shouldn't be. Based on the strength this person has shown before, he's at least above the level of a divine general, or even at the level of a heavenly venerable. Over the years, no divine general has defected from Heaven Capital, and no heavenly venerable has died, so he can't be from Heaven Capital. Moreover, I think Wuxi really doesn't seem to know him." Hearing this, it was Jiang Zhengqing's turn to be silent again. It wasn't until the two of them walked side by side for a long distance that Jiang Zhengqing said with a serious face, "I think this matter needs to be considered at length, so don't act rashly." Chapter 393. December 24th. Christmas Eve, Christmas Eve. With the rapid development of Huaxia over the years, the common people gradually began to understand and accept Western culture. Christmas was the most important holiday in Western countries. No matter how much Donghua Gate Kindergarten promoted traditional culture, they could not deliberately ignore it. Otherwise, how was it different from closing the country off? Therefore, Christmas was the only Western festival that Donghua Gate Kindergarten celebrated. Since it was a holiday, they naturally had to arrange themed activities. Playing with the children was secondary. The school mainly wanted the children to understand the differences between Chinese and Western culture more easily and understand the meaning of Christmas. They also hoped to cultivate the children's interest in learning English. After all, no matter how Huaxia developed in the future, it was imperative to integrate with the international community. Therefore, learning English was definitely beneficial to the children. The winter break would start in the middle of next month. Therefore, the kindergarten would usually set this day as the Winter Parent-Child Activity Day, requiring the parents to attend. The parent-child activity could not only promote the emotional exchange between the children and their parents, but it was also beneficial to the healthy growth of the children's body and mind. Naturally, its importance was needless to say. The kindergarten hoped that every child's parents could be present. For this reason, they gave the parents a notice half a month in advance, which could be considered as leaving sufficient time for the parents to prepare. Qin Ruoying originally wanted to participate. However, because she had taken the largest portion of the elixir some time ago, if she did not go into seclusion to digest it in time, much of the medicinal effect would be wasted. The adumbra flower was so precious. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? Qin Ruoying's aptitude was very ordinary. If she did not rely on external help, then when would she be able to break through to the celestial being level? Chun-Shi had no choice but to repeatedly persuade her. After the little fellow said that she must let her mother have a good rest, Qin Ruoying reluctantly returned to her room and went into seclusion. Qin Ruoying could not be present, and Chun-Shi had other arrangements that day. Therefore, he had to find someone to take care of Nian for him temporarily. This important task, naturally, it fell on his sister-in-law's shoulders. For this, Chun-Shi specially called out his sister-in-law, who was in seclusion. Qin Xueqing had always been impatient with Nian, as if she didn't like children. However, Chun-Shi knew very well Qin Xueqing was a typical example of a woman who said she didn't want to, but her body reacted honestly. Nian was taken care of by her sister-in-law, but the brothers were in trouble. The last time the two of them complained in the classroom that they didn't have a father, so Chun-Shi wanted Xia Kaiji to attend the Christmas party in person, hoping to ease the estrangement between father and son. After all, blood is thicker than water. When Chun-Shi proposed this idea, although Gu Lao still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he did not speak out against it. On the other hand, the reaction of the two brothers was obviously a bit too extreme. "We don't have a father." No, there isn't. "We don't want daddy. I just want my mother." The two brothers said one after another, and no matter what, they refused to acknowledge this father. This made Xia Kaiji, who was hiding outside the tea house, so sad that he shed tears. When he received Chun-Shi's call, Xia Kaiji was full of joy, thinking that Gu Lao had finally forgiven him. Unexpectedly, the children actually refused to acknowledge him. How could Xia Kaiji not feel sad? Chun-Shi tried to persuade the two brothers, but how could children easily give in when they were stubborn? Whoever tied the bell should untie it. Chun-Shi suddenly thought of Gu Yao, so he used the soul crystal to directly summon Gu Yao's soul back. After this period of recuperation, Gu Yao more or less recovered some of her consciousness. After being summoned by Chun-Shi, she quietly floated over the tea house and saw everything that happened in front of her with her own eyes. Gu Lao sat in the booth sullenly. The two brothers stood on the side, crying endlessly. Xia Kaiji hid in the corner and silently wiped his tears from the day she passed away. This happy family had already been shattered. Gu Yao was just an ordinary person, without the support of a profound cultivation base. Even with Chun-Shi's help, how long could her soul last? 3 years? 5 years? Or 10 years? In the end, she would disappear from the world, just like water evaporating. Not a single trace of her could be found. She was gone, but the children were still there. Even after 10 years, they would only be 15 or 16 years old teenagers. Gu Lao was already old. Did he really want them to grow up alone like wild children, without anyone to rely on? Gu Yao was persuaded by Chun-Shi, and she finally figured it out. After the resentment that had shrouded her heart for a long time dissipated, her soul seemed to be a little purer. Then, Gu Yao quietly came to the two brothers. She didn't know what she said to the two brothers, but they quickly quieted down and obediently followed Chun-Shi out of the tea house, standing in front of their biological father again. "Daddy." The two brothers hesitated for a long time, and then finally called out, "Daddy." The moment he heard these two words, The man who was shining in the workplace finally couldn't hold it anymore. He knelt on the ground. His hands tightly hugged the two brothers. Because of a moment of excitement, Xia Kaiji actually let out a whimper. "I'm sorry. Yao Yao. I'm sorry." He touched the two brothers' face, looking at them who obviously grew a lot taller. His tear-stained face couldn't help but reveal a trace of smile. "I'm sorry, it's all Daddy's fault. Daddy let you suffer. I'm sorry, Yao Yao. I regret it so much." Xia Kaiji repented painfully, but he didn't know that every word he said now floated into Gu Yao's heart without missing a single word. Gu Yao came to Xia Kaiji's back, as usual, gently hugged him from the back. But it was a pity Xia Kaiji could no longer feel the kind of feeling from before. She quietly returned to the tea house, leaving the warm moment to Xia family's father and son. Sister-in-law sat in the booth, bored to death, flipping through the book, as if she was not interested in everything around her. The Christmas party will only start after school. Nian was still in school. The two brothers were taken out by Chun-Shi. Qin Xueqing seemed to be dissatisfied with Chun-Shi because of this trivial matter. So when she saw Chun, she came over, she rolled her eyes at Chun-Shi, and then turned her body to the side. Seeing this, Chun-Shi didn't take it to heart, but directly sat in front of her and smiled and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Why did you say you were cultivating?" Sister-in-law didn't answer. She didn't even bother to lift her eyelids. Chun-Shi waited for a while. Seeing that she still didn't speak, he continued to say, "Your so-called cultivation, first of all, is to get rid of the distracting thoughts, not to care about the chaos of the mortal world, or else, if the heart is not calm, it will mess up your actions. But why do I feel this kind of cultivation is no different from getting rid of feelings? Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Getting rid of feelings, getting rid of desires. Is that still a human?" After hearing this sentence, Qin Xueqing finally reacted. She looked at Chun-Shi with a speechless face, and just as she was about to say something, Chun-Shi stood up and walked out. Before she left, Chun-Shi didn't even look back as she threw down a sentence. This situation was very similar to the last time they talked. "I'll also leave you with a sentence. Who doesn't cultivate in life? Through the years of wind, frost, rain, and snow, feel the mellow and long life, the gains." Chapter 394. 7 o'clock in the evening. The lanterns were lit, and the night was still dark. Shangjing City was shrouded in darkness, and the Forbidden City was sleeping soundly. Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was only a street away from the Forbidden City, was brightly lit and lively for the first time today. The children had just finished dinner when the Christmas theme party slowly began. Shangjing's winter was very cold, so the party could only be held in each class. Under Chun-Shi's repeated requests, Qin Xueqing reluctantly walked into the classroom. It had to be said that Qin Xueqing's image was indeed very outstanding. As soon as she stepped into the classroom, she successfully attracted everyone's attention. The classroom, which was noisy before, instantly became much quieter because of this. Which child's parent is this? So beautiful. Why haven't I seen her before? Is she a star? I don't know. This is the first time I've seen her. Look, she's here, she's here. In the classroom, regardless of gender, age, everyone couldn't help but look at Qin Xueqing a few more times. There were indeed many good-looking people in this world. Almost all of them were beauties in magazines and on TV, but it was extremely rare to see a beauty in real life. Beauty was one thing, but the other was because of temperament. When a living person stood in front of you, the temperament she exuded would directly affect the overall beauty of this person. Qin Xueqing was indeed very beautiful, but what was really eye-catching about her was actually her temperament, which was like an iceberg, extremely beautiful, but at the same time daunting. She was like a holy mountain on the plateau, which could only be looked up at, but could not be climbed. Ani, I'm here." As soon as Qin Xueqing walked into the classroom, the little girl immediately noticed her, so she excitedly waved her little hand at her. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing went straight to the little girl and sat down. Qin Xueqing had always been indifferent to the little girl, but this little girl was very affectionate to her. Therefore, as soon as Qin Xueqing sat down, the little girl very intimately lay on her lap, then raised her little head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie, where's Daddy? Why isn't Daddy here?" "Don't worry, he'll be here soon." "Oh, okay." Hearing this, the little guy nodded obediently, then reached out to pick up a piece of candy from the table and handed it to Qin Xueqing. "Andy, have some candy." "No need, I've already eaten." Oh, after not seeing each other for a long time, the little fellow wanted to be intimate with Qin Xueqing, but she didn't expect that Qin Xueqing was still indifferent to her. However, the little boy did not mind at all. Instead, he stuck close to Qin Xueqing and started to play by himself. "Hello, Miss Qin." Xia Kaiji had already met Qin Xueqing before, so he nodded to her politely. However, he was tactful and didn't try to talk to Qin Xueqing. After greeting her, he continued to whisper with the two brothers. Xia Kaiji didn't strike up a conversation with Qin Xueqing, but Wang Junsheng and Zhao Ziyu couldn't hold it anymore. In front of a peerless beauty, as a normal man, how could he not let his imagination run wild? What's more, the two of them had always felt that they were superior. They were rich and powerful, so naturally, they wouldn't shrink back just because Qin Xueqing showed a sour face. "Hello, are you Ninian's aunt?" "I am." Wang Junsheng tried to talk to Qin Xueqing with the help of the child. However, before he finished speaking, Qin Xueqing said coldly, "Not interested." After that, Qin Xueqing closed her eyes directly and sat in the classroom with her eyes closed. Wang Junsheng was given the cold shoulder and had no choice but to get together with Zhao Ziyu resentfully. Although the two of them were nearly 10 years apart, they had the same bad ideas. Therefore, after giving Wang Junsheng a look, Zhao Ziyu secretly took out his cell phone and prepared to secretly take a photo of Qin Xueqing for investigation. However, the moment Zhao Ziyu turned on the camera, a stream of vital essence hit the cell phone, causing the screen to turn off. Zhao Ziyu fiddled with the cell phone for a long time and found that it couldn't be turned on. He had to take a deep look at Qin Xueqing, try to remember her appearance. Qin Xueqing naturally knew what he was doing, so she opened her eyes and prepared to teach Zhao Ziyu a lesson. However, at this moment, a burst of cheerful music suddenly sounded in the classroom. Ding, ding, dang, ding, ding, dang, bell, ding, dang. How happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. Ding, ding, dang, ding, ding, dang, bell, ding, dang. How happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. The moment the accompaniment of ding, ding, dang sounded, all the children in the class sang together with the teacher. This was a surprise prepared by the teacher for the parents. The moment the music sounded, the Christmas lights in the classroom were all lit up. After the teacher took out the Christmas spray and sprayed it on the glass, the atmosphere in the classroom was suddenly pushed to the highest point. Every child's face was filled with the most enthusiastic smile. Since it was a parent-child activity, naturally parents and children had to play games together. The content of the game was very simple, which was to ask parents to accompany their children to make a Christmas card. Looking at the scissors, glue, colored pens, and socks on the table, Qin Xueqing's expression froze on the spot. When had she ever made these things in her life? But she had no choice. She had already promised Chun-Shi that she would take care of Ninian for him. Even if Qin Xueqing was unwilling now, she had to be patient and accompany the little girl to pick up the scissors and paintbrush and began to make the first Christmas card in her life. While teaching everyone how to make a card, the teacher told a short story about Christmas on the podium. The most attractive one was, of course, Santa Claus, who gave gifts to every child on Christmas Eve. After telling the story, the teacher motioned for everyone to stop what they were doing for a while and then announced loudly, "Children, look, who's here?" After that, the teacher pointed to the door of the classroom. Then, a Santa Claus wearing a red coat and a long white beard appeared outside the door. Santa Claus! The moment Santa Claus appeared, the children were in an uproar. He held a big red bag with many small gifts in it. As soon as he entered the classroom, he began to give the children gifts, and at the same time, he gave them an apple that meant peace. Finally, Santa Claus came to the little girl. The little girl eagerly took the apple from the old man's hand, looked up, and found that the face hidden under the beard was particularly familiar. Dad! He was indeed a biological child. Even if she was wearing a beard, the little girl still recognized him at a glance. Dad! The little girl excitedly jumped up and was about to go forward and hug Shi, but Shi made a shushing gesture to her. Don't let others know that Dad is Santa Claus. This is a secret. If you tell others, Dad can't be Santa Claus. Hearing this, the little girl suddenly nodded quickly like a chicken pecking at rice. I won't say. For the little girl, there was obviously nothing more surprising than her father being Santa Claus. The little girl was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, but her sister-in-law had a speechless expression. She never thought. She asked her to come out and take care of Yin just to make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus tonight. Did he make a mistake? In fact, since the school proposed the Christmas theme party, Shi went to discuss with the teacher, hoping that he could make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus. Originally, Santa Claus was to be played by the kindergarten staff, but since there were children's parents who were willing to make a cameo appearance, the teacher naturally wouldn't reject, and so today's event happened. Of course, this secret couldn't be known by the other children, otherwise they would be envious. This was the surprise that Shi specially prepared for Yin. From the little girl's reaction, his goal was achieved. Therefore, the first surprise that Yin experienced in her life. Chapter 395. Since she found out that her father was Santa Claus, the little girl had been very excited. She wanted to share the joy in her heart with the two brothers, but she had scruples about Shi's warning just now, so she could only hold her little face and wriggle with excitement all night. Maybe it was because Shiweching was sitting next to her today, so when the little girl drew the Christmas card, she specially drew it for her. This is Dad. This is Mom. This is Andy. After drawing the card, the little girl handed the card to Shiweching as if she was presenting a treasure. When Wanqing saw the little red person with a big belly on the card, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Wasn't this chubby Santa Shi? Looking at Yin's little face that had turned red because of happiness. Suddenly, Shiweching seemed to finally understand Shi's idea. With such a daughter, what more could a man ask for? It was said that a daughter was her father's little lover in his last life. Wasn't it because the first man in the world who saw her smile or cry was her father? The first man in the world who hugged her and kissed her was her father. The first man in the world who dared to say to her that he would always be by her side was also her father. Her father was her daughter's most firm and dependable support, and also the most affectionate and sincere man in the world to her. Only her father would care about her and love her without asking for anything in return. Her father would never be like other men. Yesterday, he kept saying that he loved you, but today, he would stab you with the sharpest knife. In short, no matter what her father did, he always had only one starting point, and that was for the good of his daughter. As for whether his daughter could feel and understand the strong father's love in it, it was obviously another matter. A father's love was like a mountain, and a mother's love was like water. The mountain was high, mighty, and magnificent. The mountain was high, and the scenery was moving. The water was good, and the flow was meticulous. It was trickling, soft, and flowing continuously. This was a Christmas full of joy and joy. After the cards were finished, the teacher asked the children to give the cards to the people they wanted to give them to the most. Some children, under the guidance of their parents, gave the cards to their teachers. Some of the children gave the cards to their parents. Only the little girl did not do so. Instead, she put the greeting card into her small school bag. The teacher noticed her unusual behavior, so he came to her side and gently asked her who she wanted to give the card to. Hearing this, the little girl stared at her with her big eyes and asked in confusion, "Teacher, didn't you say that if we give the patients a card, they will get better faster? Mom is sick. I want to give this card to my mother. That way, Mom will recover faster." After saying that, the little girl patted her school bag like a treasure. It seemed that she had high expectations for this greeting card. Chun-Shi had lied to her that her mother was sick, and the little girl had always kept this matter in her heart. Patience needed more care and attention. This 5-year-old child had already learned how to care for others. Qin Shiueching fell silent. She gently stroked the little fellow's head, but didn't say a word, because she finally understood what exactly was his sister searching for back then. 10,000 Holy Valley was too cold. The stubborn feudal clan rules restricted her thoughts. So all along, she only had one pursuit in her heart. That was to cultivate, and cultivate again. Why cultivate? To ascend. But wasn't ascension another form of liberation? It was only at this moment that Qin Shiueching truly saw her own heart clearly. She seemed to be strong and decisive, but in fact, she was much weaker than Qin Ruoying. At least, her sister could violate the clan rules in order to pursue what she wanted, but she could only numb herself by cultivating day and night. Just like what Chun-Shi said, humans had 7 emotions and 6 desires. This was an unavoidable fact. If one extinguished their emotions and desires, would they still be human? Looking at Nianyan's innocent and beautiful smile, Qin Shiueching suddenly felt enlightened. She closed her eyes, and the vital energy in her body suddenly began to flow slowly. Under her influence, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the originally closed doors and windows of the classroom. The wind blew the paper on the picture album on the table, and also gently brushed the faces of all the children. No one noticed that something was wrong with her. This woman with exceptional talent and excellent aptitude. She actually had an epiphany just like that. At this moment, Chun-Shi had also changed and returned to the classroom. He noticed that Qin Shiueching was acting strangely, so he immediately set up a restriction to ensure that her epiphany would not be disturbed by the outside world. "Dad, what's wrong with Annie? Auntie is tired. Let her rest for a while. She'll be fine soon." "Oh, then let's speak softly. Don't disturb Annie. Good girl, you're sensible." His sister-in-law had an epiphany. After the Christmas party ended, she went home and shut herself in. The secular world tempered her heart, and she took it with equanimity. The world was full of disturbances, and her heart reflected the secular world. Chun-Shi just casually gave some advice, but he didn't expect Qin Shiueching to understand it completely. Chun-Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry about this. After all, this question was obviously beyond the scope of the syllabus. Perhaps this was what they meant by flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but willows planted without the intention do. Ever since she found the Earth Soul, Qin Shiueching's cultivation level shot up like a rocket. Qin Ruoying had the best resources, but her cultivation progress was still like a tortoise's crawl. There was no obvious improvement at all. Everyone had their own fate. Fortunately, Qin Ruoying was not a narrow-minded person. Otherwise, she would be depressed to death if she saw this situation. December 31st. It was the last day of the year. Chun-Shi waited outside the West Wing door, like a father waiting for his child to be born. He paced back and forth in the courtyard, slightly anxious. Suddenly, a strong wave of spirit energy surged out from the West Wing. Chun-Shi immediately jumped into the room, as if he had been electrocuted. As soon as he entered, he saw Qin Ring sitting cross-legged on the bed and looking at him with a yin-yang smile. Qin Ruoying had finally fully digested the effects of the spirit pill and officially came out of seclusion. "Come, Ying, let me see if there are any side effects." As Chun-Shi spoke, she moved closer to Qin Ruoying with a bashful face. In fact, Qin Ruoying had only broken through to the diviner stage. It wasn't a forced breakthrough, so how could there be any danger? Chun-Shi was taking the opportunity to take advantage of her. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't hesitate. Instead, she offered her red lips and gently pecked Chun-Shi's face. "Not enough, not enough. You have to do it here, too. In your dreams, not kissing. Then I'll kiss you instead. Aya, stop fooling around. Come on, just one." They were obviously an old couple, but when the two of them were together, they were still as sweet as before. After a round of lovemaking, Qin Ruoying gently leaned on Chun-Shi's shoulder and then chatted with him casually. "How has Nianyan been doing during this time?" "Very good. She even made you a greeting card." When is the school holiday? Around the middle of next month. So soon? Why don't we take Nyan out for a trip when she's on holiday? Oh, where do you want to go? Anywhere is fine as long as you're with me. Okay, you've worked hard during this time. I'll arrange it. When the time comes, let's go on a trip around the world as a family. How about that? The word cultivation was never the topic of conversation between husband and wife. They preferred to live in the moment and enjoy the sweet time with their family. And this should be the so-called happiness, right? Therefore, the only thing she wanted now was to let this happiness continue to last. No one could ruin his happy life. Chapter 396, January 3rd. After the New Year's holiday, Nyan and the two brothers reluctantly returned to school. They had a great time during the holiday. The short time he spent with his son made Xia Kaiji experience a kind of happiness that he had never experienced before. Therefore, he came to the tea house every day. No matter how Gu Lao gave him a hard time, he acted like nothing had happened and followed the three children around shamelessly. No matter what the children wanted, Xia Kaiji would immediately run to buy it for them. Looking at his eagerness, people who didn't know would think that he had a mistress outside. As a father, Chunshi could naturally understand Xia Kaiji's feelings, so he didn't deliberately reject him. Instead, he gave him the responsibility of taking care of the children. In this regard, Xia Kaiji certainly couldn't ask for more. Therefore, he took the three children to stroll around Hohai every day. There were many people during the holiday. For safety reasons, Chunshi even let the big cat follow them all the way to prevent the three children from getting lost. With a young and strong nanny like Xia Kaiji, Chunshi immediately became free. He could finally free up some time to spend a few days with Qin Ruoying in their sweet two-person world, falling in love, getting married, having children. Each stage would give people different insights. After changing from a two-person world to a three-person world, life would become trivial and repetitive, and there would no longer be the romance when two people were together. Even if 500 years had passed, she was still a romantic person. So every morning, as soon as Xia Kaiji took the three children out of the tea house, she took Qin Ruoying to start their honeymoon trip. Just as the lyrics say, I want to take you to romantic Turkey, then go to Tokyo and Paris. Actually, I really like Miami and Los Angeles with black people. Other people travel by walking, but she traveled by flying. In a short span of 3 days, he had brought Qin Ruoying around the earth once. From Asia to Europe, from North America to South America. They rode in Venice and saw the sea in the Aegean Sea. They went to Iceland to enjoy the polar scenery, and then went to Africa to experience the tropical scenery. America's Grand Canyon, Egypt's pyramids, Turkey's Cotton Island, Maldives' Sea of Stars. Everyone had their own experience with traveling. And Chunshi's experience was, the world is so big, I only want you by my side. When Nyan came home every night, she would happily tell her mother where she had been, but she didn't know, when she was still squeezing around in Shangjing City, her father had already brought her mother to play all over the world. It was a happy holiday, a sweet time that only belonged to mom and dad. The little guy was still young, so he naturally didn't understand the world of adults. Perhaps out of compensation, she decisively decided, when Nyan turned 16, he would take her to travel around the world. She was a girl after all, so she naturally had to be pampered. The higher one's horizons were, the harder it was for them to be fooled. In this regard, she even had a malicious fantasy. When Nyan grew up, if a boy chased her and said that he wanted to take her on a trip, Nyan would respond with disdain. Where are we going? The moon? If it's not the moon, then stop. My dad has already taken me to play all over the world. Thinking of this, Chunshi's mouth couldn't help but reveal a smug smirk. He really wanted to know, under his wise guidance, who could easily trick Nyan away from him. Humph, how dare you lie to Nyan? I'll break your leg for you. The holiday was over, and the days immediately returned to the usual peace. Chunshi seemed to be idling around all day with nothing to do, but she was secretly playing a big game of chess. The reason why he suddenly took Qin Ruoying on a trip around the world was, on one hand, to enjoy the two of them, and, on the other hand, it was completely because of Wushu. As the saying goes, if you don't kill the snake, it will eventually be harmful. After Wushu escaped with serious injuries, Chunshi did think of looking for him. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find him? Wushu was like an injured, poisonous snake, hiding in a dark corner of the earth, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The earth was very big, but for cultivators of their level, the earth was still too small. This feeling was like having a poisonous snake at home, but Chunshi couldn't find it no matter how hard he tried. Chunshi wasn't afraid of poisonous snakes, but Nian Yin and Ying Ying were afraid. With Wushu's cultivation level, other than Chunshi, who else could deal with him? It was imperative to get rid of the source of the problem. Therefore, Chunshi set up restrictions in most areas of the world. These restrictions were equivalent to radars, each covering a range and sensing the fluctuation of spirit energy in the area at all times. As long as Wushu attacked within the range of the restrictions, Chunshi would be able to detect his location immediately. Of course, if Wushu didn't attack, Chunshi wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Anyway, let's take it slow. Let's see who has more patience. Needless to say, Chunshi's idea was very good, but he didn't expect this at all. Life always brings unexpected surprises to people. The weather was sunny today. The highest temperature was 6 degrees Celsius. Chunshi moved a chair to sit in the courtyard, basking in the sun, while teaching Qin Ruoying his experience of condensing the core. The so-called cultivation naturally couldn't be achieved overnight. Dual cultivation and whatnot, that was something that only evil cultivators would practice. Chunshi claimed to be a good youth, so naturally, he wouldn't use this method to forcefully raise Qin Ruoying's cultivation level. It didn't matter if her aptitude was poor, as long as she cultivated slowly, there would be a day when she would break through. Ying Ying, hold your breath and try to gather your vital essence in your energy center. Actually, the process of condensing the core is like forging iron. Only through repeated tempering and hammering can the impurities in the iron block be beaten out, thus making the treasured sword sharper and sturdier. Chunshi explained in an easy-to-understand way, so that Qin Ruoying could understand more easily. After listening to his explanation, Qin Ruoying started to try to refine the primordial core in her body according to his method. The difference between the primordial core and the golden core was probably the difference between iron and steel. Only after going through a lot of tempering could iron become hard. After all, after repeated forging, it would become steel. After Qin Ring entered a meditative state, Chunshi set up a restriction for her, then sat beside her and observed silently. The situation was not bad. The elixir provided Qin Ruoying with enough raw materials, so the only thing she had to do now was to put all these raw materials into a furnace, then burn them repeatedly until the golden core came out. This was a very long process. Chunshi watched for a while, and after confirming that Qin Ruoying did not go astray, he closed his eyes and started his own cultivation. However, not long after Chunshi closed his eyes, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped. She suddenly opened her eyes. Then, as if she was feeling a little uncomfortable, she subconsciously reached out and rubbed her forehead. Ying Ying, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Chunshi sensed that something was wrong with her, so he immediately jumped up from his chair and appeared directly beside Qin Ruoying, then gently pressed his hand on her back. My head is a little dizzy. Do I have a fever? Qin Ruoying rubbed her head, then forced a smile at Chunshi. What fever? You're already a diviner. How can a diviner fall sick? After saying that, Chunshi closed his eyes and began to sense if there was a spirit energy tied in some corner of the earth. However, after searching for a while, he did not find any signs of a spirit energy tied. It was as if the entire earth had fallen asleep. It was quiet and peaceful. She was a little confused. However, just as he was feeling very confused, Qin Ring suddenly closed her eyes and fainted beside him. Chapter 397. The moment Qin Ruoying fainted, Chunshi was completely stunned. He subconsciously reached out to support Qin Ruoying, but at the same time, he looked up at the sky. It was winter at the moment, but the sky in Shangjing City was blue and white, clear and boundless. The warm winter sun emitted a warm, golden light. It should have been a leisurely and comfortable afternoon, but a trace of coldness gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. He picked up Qin Ruoying by the waist and looked at his lover leaning unconsciously on his shoulder. At this moment, his mind was completely blank. Why? Why exactly? Where did the spirit energy tide appear? Why didn't he notice any abnormalities? Chun-Shi gently placed Qin Ruoying on the bed. Then, he sat cross-legged next to his lover. Without any hesitation, he directly took out the soul crystal and then used the amplification effect of the soul crystal to greatly enhance the strength of his divine soul. At the same time, the restrictions that Chun-Shi had set up all over the world seemed to have been stimulated by something. They suddenly expanded a lot, and the area they covered almost doubled. One after another, the perceptual restrictions were like a big net that covered the sky. The moment the big net opened, Chun-Shi's consciousness also spread out. In his perception, the whole world was quiet, so calm that there was not a trace of ripple. Chun-Shi did not believe it, so he mobilized his divine soul with all his strength, trying to bring the whole earth into his perception range. However, how big was the earth? The 7 continents only occupied 29% of the area, and the remaining 71% was all ocean. Chun-Shi was already struggling to perceive the 29% of the land, so how could he forcibly perceive the rest of the ocean? This was not a battle, and it had nothing to do with the accumulation of true essence. It was purely relying on the perception of the divine soul. This level of consumption had completely exceeded the limit of what he could bear. Therefore, after holding on for a few minutes, Chun-Shi's 7 orifices began to strangely bleed. Fortunately, Nian was not at home at the moment. Otherwise, wouldn't she be frightened by his current appearance? Chun-Shi gritted his teeth and persevered for a long time. In the end, because his spirit was unable to bear the burden, he had no choice but to stop this dangerous action. There was no sign of the tide surging, but Qin Ring still fainted because of dizziness. No matter how slow-witted Chun-Shi was, he should have figured out the reason by now. It turned out that he had been looking in the wrong direction. Previously, whenever Qin Ruoying felt dizzy, it must be when the tide was surging and the gate of heaven was about to open. This also made Chun-Shi fall into a misunderstanding, thinking that Yingying's illness was related to all of this. In fact, the spirit Qi tide was a blessing given to cultivators by the heavens. How could it bring bad effects to people? The crux of the problem was not because of the spirit energy tide, but because sky-bearing art, floating dawn mirror. Every time the tide surged, the people behind the heavenly gate would take out the heaven-bearing, efficacious floating mirror. Although he was not clear about the true use of this treasure, there was no doubt that once Tiandu used the sky-bearing art, Xiannu, who was in the lower realm, would definitely be affected. Xiannu. The names sounded good, but in reality, they were just a bunch of pitiful cannon fodder. After thinking through this point, Chun-Shi stopped all of his meaningless actions and quietly sat beside Qin Ruoying. He quietly looked at his lover's face, hoping that the first thing she saw when she woke up would be him. Unfortunately, Qin Ruoying did not wake up. It was as if she was asleep. Her breathing was slightly weak, but the frequency was orderly. Chun-Shi waited silently. But this time, Qin Ruoying was unconscious for a much longer time than the last time. As the light in the room dimmed bit by bit, it meant that the sun was about to set. Ring, ring, ring. Suddenly, a melodious ringtone sounded. It was Chun-Shi's cell phone. At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he suddenly realized Nian was out of school. As expected, the moment Chun-Shi picked up the phone, the little fellow's sweet voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "Daddy, where are you?" "We're out of school." Daddy was delayed by something. "I'll come pick you up now. Wait for Daddy for 1 more minute. Okay?" "Okay." After hanging up the phone, Chun-Shi lowered his head to look at his lover, who was still in a deep sleep. After gently kissing her forehead, Chun-Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the room. When he appeared again, he was already outside the school gate. "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy! Daddy is here to pick me up. Goodbye, teacher." As usual, the moment the little fellow saw Chun-Shi, she immediately raised her little hand, stepped forward, and ran towards him excitedly. After Chun, she picked up the little fellow from the ground. The two brothers who had been following the little fellow finally relaxed and waved goodbye to the little fellow reluctantly. The two of them were now picked up by Xia Kaiji's car every day. Naturally, they did not have to trouble Chun-Shi every day. Daddy, teacher taught us how to sing today. And what song? Two tigers. After saying that, the little fellow grinned very proudly. If it was in the past, Chun-Shi would definitely accompany her to sing all the way home. However, to the little fellow's disappointment, Chun-Shi just nodded casually today, and then there was nothing else. Seeing this, the little fellow was obviously a little unhappy. Just as she was about to flare up, the little fellow suddenly seemed to have thought of something, so she immediately shut her little mouth and quietly lay on Chun-Shi's shoulder. The teacher said, "Everyone has a time when they're in a bad mood. Even Daddy and Mommy are no exception. Daddy is in a bad mood today, so I won't disturb Daddy." Nian is very sensible. The father and daughter quickly returned home without saying anything. At this time, the little fellow finally knew why Daddy was in a bad mood. Mommy is sick again. Looking at Mommy lying on the bed, the little fellow followed Daddy's usual behavior and carefully covered Mommy with a quilt. After that, the little fellow stopped making a fuss. After eating her dinner obediently, she started to watch cartoons in silence. While watching cartoons, the little fellow would still look back at Daddy and Mommy from time to time. Daddy had been silently staying by Mommy's bedside. Although the cartoon characters on the TV kept making noises, there was a strange silence in the room from beginning to end. Time passed by, and soon it was time for the little fellow to sleep. She was sleepy. However, she did not call Daddy. Instead, she ran to the bathroom, then brought a small stool and tiptoed to turn on the tap. The sudden sound of running water startled Chun-Shi. At this time, he finally realized that he had neglected Nian, so he quickly got up to help the little fellow wash up. After washing up, Chun-Shi carried her to the bed. The little girl laid down on the bed by herself, and then slipped into the warm blanket like a wisp of smoke. The little fellow covered half of her face with the quilt, only revealing a pair of bright big eyes. Then, she used her big eyes to look at Mommy, who was sleeping soundly beside her, then looked at Daddy, who was beside her with a cloud of worry. At that moment, the little fellow seemed to have suddenly grown up. She actually hid in the quilt and comforted him in a muffled voice. "Daddy, don't be sad. Mommy will get better." The moment he heard this sentence, Chun-Shi's nose twitched, and an indescribable feeling surged in his heart. "Good girl, go to sleep. Daddy knows Mommy will get better. When Mommy gets better, Daddy will take you on a trip, okay?" "Okay." After hearing Chun-Shi's words, the little fellow's face suddenly revealed a smile. Then, she suddenly sat up from the bed, leaned over, and kissed Chun-Shi's face heavily, then obediently lay back down. "Mua. Good night, Daddy. I'm going to sleep." Chapter 398. The little fellow was sensible. In addition to knowing not to cause trouble for Dad, she even learned how to comfort Dad. Therefore, after Nian entered that sweet dreamland, Chun-Shi let out a soft sigh in this dark room. "Dad, don't be sad. Mom will get better." The little fellow had already fallen asleep, but her words kept echoing in Chun-Shi's ears. Chun-Shi silently savored this sentence. After a long time, he was like the prince who kissed Snow White in the fairy tale, kissing the little fellow and Qinruoying's face one by one, then got up and left the room. As soon as he opened the door, a cold wind mixed with snowflakes suddenly hit his face. It started to snow in Shangjing City again. Chun-Shi withdrew his vital essence, allowing the cold wind to wantonly enter his sleeves, and silently felt the chill brought by the cold wind. The whole sky was dark. There was only a little bit of weak moonlight, which seemed so cold. Chun-Shi set up a restriction in the room, so that he could know the situation of Qinruoying at the first moment. Then, he flew directly into the dark night sky. He flew very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he had already flown out of Huaxia and arrived above the Pacific Ocean. And the destination of his trip Obviously, it was the waterless cave located in the deep sea. Deep in the cave, Bai Hong and Qing Wan were still like suffering Jesus, hanging high above the cave by Chen Shi. Chen Shi didn't want to kill indiscriminately, so he kept them here. Because of the suppression of the spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles, the injuries of the two people did not get any treatment, but worsened a lot, so they looked very bad. Being in prison was actually a very terrifying thing, especially this kind of cage that was similar to a small darkroom. Unable to see the sun, unable to communicate with people in this cramped and oppressive space. The most frightening and tormenting thing was it was actually loneliness. Qing Wan's injuries were more serious, so she could only be awake for about 2 or 3 hours a day, and at other times, she was in a self-protective coma. Chen Shi came at the right time today, just when Qing Wan was awake. Bai Hong and Qing Wan were talking a low voice. As soon as they heard the movement caused by Chen Shi flying out of the cold pool, a trace of fear flashed across their faces. Yes, Divine General Tiandu was also afraid. After a long period of confinement, they had developed a fear of Chen Shi. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of this endless loneliness. Come, kill me, kill me. The moment Chen Shi appeared, Qing Wan was like an enraged beast, crazily roaring at Chen Shi. As he roared, he spat at Chen Shi in an attempt to infuriate Chen Shi so that she would kill him. Do you want to die so much? Then I to you, Qing to Tiandu, to the Tiandu, to be to kill, to Tiandu to die, to be killed. Then, a stream of qi like a heavy hammer smashed into Qing Wan's chest. Qing Wan was already injured, and after suffering such a heavy blow, she immediately spat out a large mouthful of blood. She could only hang her head weakly, and it seemed that she had lost half of her life. Stop! You're going to kill him like this. Seeing this, Bai Hong could not help but be anxious. Although she also had the idea of dying early and being free, it was just a thought. Even ants crave for life, not to mention them, the divine generals. Bai Hong did not want to die, and was even more unwilling to see Qing Wan die in front of her. Chen Shi would not come for no reason. Today he suddenly came. There must be something to ask. Therefore, after a strong struggle in her mind, Bai Hong asked in a tone that was close to begging for mercy, "What do you want to know? As long as it does not involve the core of Tiandu, I can tell you without reservation. Is that so?" Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled with satisfaction. But that smile, it looked a little cold. "I want to know everything about the sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror. Can you tell me?" As he spoke, Chen Shi slowly rose from the ground and then flew straight to Qing Wan. He was obviously talking to Bai Hong, but he used his qi to lift Qing Wan's head and began to size up this poor divine general who was covered in wounds. Bai Hong, of course, understood what Chen Shi meant. If she kept silent, Chen Shi would obviously use the soul-sucking technique on Qing Wan. Seeing this, Bai Hong replied rather straightforwardly, "Sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror? No problem. I can tell you, that is the treasure left behind by the divine ancestor. We now call it Soul Mirror." Soul Mirror? Chen Shi repeated this name, then frowned and asked, "What is its use?" Hearing this, Bai Hong immediately answered honestly, "The 5 great temples and the 13 soul-gathered cauldrons are all related to the Soul Mirror. Simply put, you can see it as the key to open the gate of heaven. Don't blame me for not telling you. Although the Soul Mirror is a treasure, it has no practical use. Apart from when it is needed to open the gate of heaven, it can only be placed in the Imperial Hall as a decoration." Bai Hong thought that Chen Shi was after the divine ancestor's treasure, so she couldn't help but remind him. However, after hearing this, Chen Shi continued to ask, "If I were to ascend from the lower realm and enter the gate of heaven, where would I appear? Where is the Imperial Hall? Who is usually in charge of the Soul Mirror? What is this person's cultivation? Are there any other defensive arrangements around it?" Bai Hong was stunned by Chen Shi's series of questions. He stared blankly at Chen Shi for a long while before saying in shock, "You're actually thinking about the Soul Mirror?" Chen Shi roared impatiently, "Answer my question." Bai Hong was really scared. Looking at Chen Shi's attitude, he really wanted to go to the Imperial Hall to snatch the soul mirror? What kind of place was the Imperial Hall? That was the core of the divine capital, equivalent to the Emperor's throne room. Are you crazy? Bai Hong looked at Chun-Shi speechlessly. At this moment, Chun-Shi looked like a bloodthirsty gambler. Seeing that Bai Hong was unwilling to answer, he actually pressed his hand on Qing Wan's head and used the soul-snatching technique. In fact, the soul-snatching technique was not as exaggerated as Chun-Shi had said before. This technique had a lot of restrictions. After using it, one could only inquire about some insignificant surface information. If it involved important secrets, the target's soul would automatically hide it, making the caster unable to pry. Since Qing Wan was a divine general of the divine capital, he obviously had a detailed understanding of the layout of the Imperial Hall. To Qing Wan, the Imperial Hall was no secret at all. Naturally, it would not be deliberately protected by his soul. Chapter 399. He saw. The moment Chun-Shi pressed his palm on Qing Wan's head, Qing Wan seemed to have been electrocuted. Her body twitched violently in the unconscious state. Bai Hong was stunned. He never thought that Chun-Shi would actually really deal such a vicious blow to Qing Wan. Stop! At that instant, Bai Hong's eyes were about to split. However, due to the suppression of the soul-setting needle, he could only watch as the Azure Luan was tortured. Bai Hong struggled with all her might, her eyes flashing with uncontrollable anger. He gnashed his teeth so hard that they creaked, and he looked like a ferocious beast that had lost all reason due to rage. He wished for nothing more than to pounce forward and tear Chun-Shi into pieces. But unfortunately, this was just Bai Hong's wishful thinking. Chun-Shi was like a cold robot. He completely ignored the pain and anger in his heart and searched for all the information in Cyan Phoenix's mind. Since it was a four-soul search, this secret technique would naturally put a huge burden on the target's divine soul. Therefore, it didn't take long before blood began to seep out of the 7 orifices of the Green Phoenix, just like when Chun-Shi forcibly perceived the entire world. Bai Hong stared blankly as everything unfolded. He didn't understand the soul-snatching secret technique and thought that what Chun-Shi had said to scare him was true. Bai Hong could accept that Chun-Shi had directly killed Qing Wan because their skills were not as good as his. But he couldn't accept it. Chun-Shi used this method to torture Qing Wan. Absolutely not. I'm going to kill you. I'll kill you. Anger gives strength, as long as it is not mixed with the hesitation and apprehension of the weak. It was precisely because of this Bai Hong, who was already on the verge of death, actually burst out with an extremely strong true essence fluctuation from his body. This surge of true essence was too ferocious, and it actually shook off the golden needles that Chun-Shi had inserted into his body one by one. Chun-Shi didn't even have time to withdraw the secret method from Qing Wan's body before Bai Hong rushed towards him like a tiger that had just escaped from its cage. Die! Bai Hong's face was strangely flushed. As soon as he broke free, his body constantly emitted a strong, true essence fluctuation. Bai Hong's current state was very strange. He was clearly wounded all over, and there was barely a tenth of the Zhen Yuan left in his body, but he was still able to release Zhen Yuan fluctuations that were far stronger than when he was at his peak. Before it could attack, the true essence slammed into the wall again and again, causing the entire cave to tremble violently. After Bai Hong let out a roar, he immediately waved his right hand and slapped Chun-Shi's head fiercely. At this time, Chun-Shi, who sensed the abnormality, hurriedly withdrew his secret technique and took Bai Hong's palm strike head-on. Bang! In an instant, there was a violent explosion in the cave. Chun-Shi was actually forced to retreat more than 10 meters. Are you crazy? Looking at this divine general of Tiandu, who was on the verge of going crazy, it was Chun-Shi's turn to be surprised. Bai Hong is burning his own yuanying. Yuanying was the result of a cultivator's painstaking cultivation, and it was also the foundation of their abilities. Even if they died, As long as their yuaning was not extinguished, cultivator would still have a chance to be reborn. Therefore, for a cultivator, yuaning represented everything, even more important than life. Burning yuaning meant giving up everything that he had worked so hard for hundreds or even thousands of years. This kind of damage was irreversible. Once his yuaning was burned out, even if Bai Hong was lucky enough to survive today, he would not be able to cultivate from now on. And for a cultivator, what was the difference between this and death? Bai Hong simply wanted to fight to the death with Chun Shi, not stopping until one of them was dead. Seeing this, Chun Shi finally calmed down. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he asked in a slightly strange tone, "Burning yuaning? Since you're so desperate, then I admit defeat. Okay? Actually, I didn't want to kill you. This secret technique won't harm your life. It's just to scare you. How about this? Let's talk nicely. Admit defeat?" Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. But after thinking about it, he thought that Chun Shi was deliberately stalling for time. So he immediately attacked Chun Shi again. Seeing this, Chun Shi uncharacteristically turned around and ran. He had no intention of fighting with Bai Hong at all. Trying to be a hero depended on the situation. Since Bai Hong had already burned his yuaning, Chun Shi only needed to temporarily avoid the attack. After half an hour, Bai Hong would probably collapse because of his yuaning. Bai Hong clearly knew this, so he wanted to fight to the death with Chun Shi before his yuaning burned out. But what he did not expect was Chun Shi was running faster than a rabbit at this moment. His cultivation level was much higher than Bai Hong's. Now that he was determined to run, how could Bai Hong easily catch up to him? Thus, the two of them began a game of cat and mouse in the deep sea. Chun Shi was like walking a dog on an electric scooter. From time to time, he would turn around and send a voice transmission to Bai Hong. "Calm down, let's talk nicely. If you stop now, you should still be saved. You saw it too, if I'm determined to run, you won't be able to catch me at all. I advise you not to be so stubborn. When the nascent soul is burned up, I will be able to decide whether I want to kill him or not. I see that you're a man. I don't want to take your life, so I advise you." Under Chun Shi's constant persuasion, Bai Hong finally stopped. He could not catch up, and he could not beat him. What else could he do? He was also very desperate. The two confronted each other across the trench. After a long while, only then did Bai Hong say in a deep voice, "I only have one request. If you agree, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish in the future. If not, I can only fight to the death with you." In this regard, Chun Shi was very magnanimous, so he responded readily, "Okay, say it. Don't use such despicable means again, or I won't let you go even if I become a ghost." Chun Shi naturally did not take Bai Hong's threat to heart. However, he still gave Bai Hong a definite answer. "I can promise you, but there's a condition. You must make a heart-demon oath and promise that you won't hide anything from me. You must answer all the questions I ask you in full detail. If you hide anything, you will be swallowed by the oath." Hearing this, Bai Hong did not immediately answer. Instead, his eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. Of course, Chun Shi knew what he was thinking, so he immediately added, "Don't worry, I have no interest in going against Hindu. The reason why I want the soul mirror is entirely because of my wife. She is the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. So, do you understand?" After hearing Chun Shi's words, Bai Hong's expression softened. Because of the arbiter of fate Xian Nu? So that's why Bai Hong thought seriously for a while, and after receiving Chun Shi's repeated assurances, he finally stopped his suicidal behavior. Although the yuaning had not yet burned out, it had caused extremely serious damage that was almost irreversible. Therefore, the moment Bai Hong removed his inner yuan, he seemed to have aged many years, and his appearance changed from that of a young man in his 20s to that of a middle-aged man in his 40s. When Chun Shi saw his sickly appearance, and that even flying was a problem, he kindly helped him stabilize his injuries and flew him back to the cave. On the way back, Bai Hong seemed to have finally figured something out, and he suddenly turned to Chun Shi and said, "You have the strength of a celestial venerable. Tiandu shouldn't make an enemy of you for no reason. Since everything you've done is for your wife, I can tell you where the soul mirror is. I only hope that you can keep your promise." Hearing this, Chun Shi was overjoyed, and he hurriedly asked, No problem. As long as you can cure my wife, everything is negotiable. If nothing unexpected happens, the soul mirror should still be in my junior brother's hands. Your junior brother? Where is he? Did he come down with you? When we came, junior brother was still cultivating with Master. Now that we haven't returned to Tiandu yet, I'm sure Master will personally come down to check. When that time comes, junior brother might come with him. All right, what's your junior brother's name? I'll make a note of it so that I can find him in the future. He's called Wuxiu. What? Wuxiu? The moment she heard this name, Chunxi's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 400. Even if Baiyong burned his yuanying, he was still no match for Chunxi. Chunxi avoided him because he did not want to waste his energy. After all, if he could solve the problem peacefully, why would he need to resort to violence? The result was, of course, a happy ending. Baihong's life was saved, and Chunxi also got the answer he wanted. However, the moment he got the answer, Chunxi did not feel good. The sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror was actually in Wuxiu's hands. If he had known this would happen, Chunxi would have left Wuxiu on Daiyu Island, even if he burned his yuanying that day. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Wuxiu had already escaped, and at this moment, he might be hiding in some dark corner of the earth, laughing secretly. Now that things had come to this, Chunxi's regret was useless. Therefore, he could only hope that he could successfully find Wuxiu and get the soul mirror from him. Since Yingying's illness was related to the soul mirror, he had to get the soul mirror no matter what method he used. For this reason, Chunxi even had the dangerous idea of fighting his way to Tiandu. In fact, Chunxi did not want to be enemies with anyone, just like what he taught Yin on a daily basis. We do not cause trouble, but we are definitely not afraid of trouble. And this was also his daily principle. I avoided it only because I had a family. I did not want my family to take any unknown risks. The money, status, and power of the mortal world were meaningless to Chunxi. Similarly, the rare treasures, cultivation techniques, and elixirs of the cultivation world were also dispensable to Chunxi. After all, with Yin and Yingying, he already had the whole world. Why should he care about these worldly possessions? Chunxi wanted to avoid the world. Not escape, but avoid. Avoid all unnecessary trouble. But unfortunately, avoiding was not the way to solve the problem. Since the problem had already appeared, Chunxi could only think of a way to solve it. Fighting was not the only way to solve the problem. If it wasn't necessary, Chunxi wasn't willing to make enemies everywhere. Therefore, he tried to communicate with Baihong, hoping to find another way to solve this problem from Baihong. Otherwise, Chunxi might really have to fight all the way from the Heavenly Gate to the Imperial Extreme Hall. Baihong understood the situation. When he learned of Chunxi's motives, he no longer tried to obstruct him. On the contrary, he hoped that Chunxi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror, and thus resolve the illness plaguing Qin Ruang, thereby forming a good relationship with Heaven Capital. Didn't Baihong resent Chunxi? Obviously, it was impossible. However, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. Churchill once said, "There are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal interests." Since the two of them had reached a preliminary consensus, the next priority was, obviously, he wanted to find Wuxiu. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? For this reason, after a serious discussion between Chunxi and Baihong, they finally found a more reliable method. That was, Baihong appeared and used divine telekinesis to lure Wuxiu out. It was equivalent to humans sending signals to space to search for aliens. Chunxi circled the world with Baihong, and Baihong continuously released divine telekinesis to lure Wuxiu out. No matter what, the two of them were fellow disciples and had a close relationship. With Baihong as a guarantor, Wuxiu should be able to boldly show up. This method had a certain degree of feasibility. Therefore, Baihong and Qing Wan temporarily broke away from their prisoner status and became Chunxi's friends. Naturally, he couldn't treat his friends too badly. Therefore, Chunshi brought Bai Hong and Qingwan to Kongju District and temporarily settled them here. For safety reasons, Chunshi didn't remove the seal in Qingwan's body. He only relieved her internal injuries and gave her the right to move freely. After that, Chunshi began to tour the world with Bai Hong overnight. Bai Hong's divine telekinesis range was limited, so she could only release it bit by bit. The whole process was like a salesperson sweeping the floor. She needed to go door to door to hand out business cards. This was a very long process. Chunshi roughly calculated the time. Even if he flew with Bai Hong, it would take at least 3 months for Bai Hong to use divine telekinesis to sweep the world. 3 months, so be it. It was much better than being at a loss for what to do. Therefore, for the next period of time, Chunshi still sent the little girl to and from school on time during the day and took care of her daily life. At night, after the little girl fell asleep, he would start to tour the world with Bai Hong. During this period, Bai Hong was very cooperative and didn't play any tricks the whole time. But Chunshi's mood was getting heavier and heavier day by day, because Qin Ruoying had not woken up. Yingying's coma time was far beyond Chunshi's imagination. Her breathing didn't stop, and the vital essence in her body was still circulating on its own. Everything was normal, but she couldn't wake up and look like a vegetable. Bai Hong had never seen such a situation. He didn't know much about the Siming Xin Nu, so he could only persuade Chunshi not to worry too much. As long as they found the soul mirror, everything would naturally be solved. Both of them placed their hopes on Wushu, but they didn't know Bai Hong's divine telekinesis had already attracted the attention of Jiang Yin and the others. This kind of indiscriminate divine telekinesis coverage was definitely undetectable by ordinary people. But in the eyes of Jiang Yin and the others, this was equivalent to holding a loudspeaker and shouting at the entrance of a village all day long, "Wushu, Wushu, where are you? Come out, I have something to talk to you about." Because of this, Jiang Yin even pretended to call Chunshi to ask. Although they were allies, Chunshi was still wary of this old man, so he didn't tell him the truth. He only said that he wanted to find Wushu to prevent future trouble. Jiang Yin naturally didn't believe Chunshi's excuse. Therefore, this old man continued to follow Chunshi for a long time and accurately guessed Chunshi's true purpose. For Jiang Yin, Chunshi was a great help in overturning Tiandu, so he naturally couldn't let this help become a hindrance. So, Jiang Yin began to act. No one had ever noticed this mysterious organization. It was called the 9 Serenities. There were 9 heavens in the sky and 9 layers of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. Ever since the divine ancestor led the generals of Tiandu to ascend to the great world, the sinners left behind in the lower realm were full of hatred and formed this mysterious organization. Compared to Tiandu, its strength was too insignificant. After all, they could only watch the spiritual qi dry up and witness the arrival of the end of the world. They used to be high and mighty cultivators, but now they were like maggots in the gutter. Even becoming a diviner required a great opportunity. They could be as humble as dust, but they couldn't be as twisted as maggots. The resentment that had accumulated for thousands of years, it wasn't until the emergence of the first spiritual qi tide that they finally had the opportunity to release it. The generals of Tiandu didn't even know that there was such a reactionary organization in the lower realm. But the people of the 9 Serenities had already made an oath. They only lived to overturn Tiandu and avenge the suffering of thousands of years of oppression. The 9 Serenities had begun to plan a long time ago. In addition to constantly sending people to Tiandu as spies, the rest of the people were silently waiting for the opportunity. For this reason, they would rather endure hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness and torture just to wait for the right time. Now the time had come, and they only lacked the opportunity to blow the horn. And Chunshi. Chapter 401. This was an era where there were no secrets, but the existence of the 9 Serenities had never been known to outsiders. After tens of thousands of years of dormancy and management, the power of the 9 Serenities had far exceeded everyone's imagination. They were like an invisible net, firmly grasping the entire earth in the palm of their hand. Whether it was the Huaxia or other countries, from the nobles to the lowly peddlers, no one could escape the control of the Nine Serenities. It was a very simple principle. Even the Rothschild family could exist for hundreds of years, let alone a super-large organization composed of immortal cultivators like the Nine Serenities. Zhuangzi once said, "Summer insects cannot speak of ice, and children cannot speak of the sea." For immortal cultivators, fame and fortune in the eyes of mortals were meaningless. The only purpose of their existence was to one day completely overturn Tiandu and establish a new dynasty of their own, the Nine Serenities. As the spiritual energy of heaven and earth declined day by day, the celestial being almost became a threshold for cultivation. But the inheritance of the Nine Serenities was passed down generation after generation. They hid behind the scenes, providing unimaginable help to mortals and indirectly controlling one dynasty after another in the world. Whether it was the Huaxia Empire in the east, or the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or the Macedonian Empire in the west, the Nine Serenities never interfered with the rise and fall of human dynasties, but they always put down their chess pieces when necessary. After all, compared to the high and mighty Tiandu, the Nine Serenities were too weak. They had to make use of all the resources available to them in order to fight a battle with Tiandu with a great disparity in strength. The winner could have everything. Just like when the Tai-Ching divine ancestor led everyone to the great world and enjoyed the entire great world alone. The sinners who stayed in the lower realm could only suffer the depletion of spiritual energy and watch their inheritance deteriorate with each generation. That feeling, just like how human civilization degenerated from the universal era to the primitive era, how could the primitive people who stayed on Earth not hold a great grudge against Hindu? The Nine Serenities was a super-large tribe formed by these primitive people. Although the divine ancestor had kindly left the divine gate and gave the descendants of the sinners a chance to ascend. However, the old man seemed to have not thought of a problem at all, and that was if the descendants of these sinners were able to cultivate to the celestial realm in such simple conditions in the lower realm, then if they were born in the great world, how could their cultivation base stop at the celestial realm? Think about it from another perspective. I spent my entire life cultivating in the lower realm, and it took me 200 years to finally break through to the Deva realm. But when he came to Tiandu, he found that a young man in his 20s or 30s could easily become a celestial. How would the sinners of the lower bound, who had cultivated their entire lives, feel? That was how resentment was born. They could be as humble as dust, but they could not be as twisted as maggots. Such an unfair encounter had already distorted the mentality of the people of the Nine Serenities. Finally, the resentment that had accumulated in their hearts for tens of thousands of years was completely ignited with the appearance of the spirit energy tide. With the recovery of spirit chi, the human world will prosper. The Nine Serenities would never allow Tiandu to return to the lower realm, because the lower realm belonged to them. It was precisely because of this, at the same time, that Shunxi led Baihong to search for Wuxiu. The Nine Serenities led by Jiang Yin also began to move. They did not have a soul as powerful as Chunxi's, but they used a more effective method, which was face recognition. As long as there were cameras and internet coverage, there was no way to escape the detection of a supercomputer. Wuxiu might not have thought that there would be so many people in the world looking for him. After this period of recuperation, his injuries had more or less healed. However, for safety reasons, Wuxiu had never left the Arctic Circle. In addition to his daily cultivation and recuperation, this guy would lie on the iceberg, fishing and playing with polar bears. His days were quite comfortable. On this day, January 20th, it had been a full 3 months since they had escaped with a Wuxiu blood escape. If compared to the time in Tiandu, it was equivalent to 24 months, which was 2 years. Everything was relative, including time. The flow of time in the great world was different from that in the lower realm. 1 year on Earth was 8 years in heaven. and this was the fundamental reason why the flow of time in the Goyao Temple was 8 times slower than the outside world. The 5 temples were directly connected to Tiandu, so the flow of time in the temples was not Earth's time, but Tiandu's time. Chunshi used the Goyao Temple as a cultivation place before, but he did not figure out the key point. In addition, it was also because of the time difference between the 2 realms that divine generals of Tiandu were generally unwilling to come to the lower realm. Take Wuxiu, for example. He had only been in the lower realm for 3 months, but 2 years had passed in heaven. What did 2 years mean? Divine generals who were about the same cultivation level as Wuxiu had probably surpassed him by now, sailing against the current. One would fall behind if they did not advance. How could Wuxi not be depressed? Not only did Chunshi destroy the 5 temples, but he also King dispersed the spirit energy tide immediately. Without the support of the spirit energy tide, the divine gate could not be opened at all. He had a home, but he could not go back. Therefore, Wuxiu was as depressed as he could be at this moment. When he thought about how he had wasted 2 years in the lower realm, Wuxiu's mood became particularly bad. He was not in the mood to continue cultivating, so he got up and flew out, ready to stroll around and relax. For safety reasons, Wuxiu did not fly too far, but came to a human city closest to the North Pole, Longyuan City. There was the northernmost bank in the world, the northernmost church in the world, and even a university in the northernmost part of the world. There were about 1,800 people in the town. Because of the polar night, the entire town would be in darkness from November to January every year, and there was not a trace of sunlight at all. The sky here was dark green, and the cold wind was bone-chilling, but the houses were colorful. Because the 3-month-long night made this small town the most romantic place in the world. Wuxi soon arrived at Longyuan City. As soon as he walked into the town, he was deeply fascinated by the colorful houses and the colorful neon lights in front of him. Therefore, Wuxi walked directly into the bar with the most people almost without any hesitation. In terms of combat power, ordinary people were no different from ants in the eyes of immortal cultivators. But in terms of playfulness, 10,000 immortal cultivators might not be as good as one ordinary person. Maybe because he had been lonely for a long time. When Wuxi came to such a lively place, he could not help but be affected by the atmosphere in the bar. Therefore, he did not even think about it, and directly removed the breath concealment technique, then sat at the bar like an ordinary customer and drank leisurely. From beginning to end, he did not realize that the thing that kept flashing red on the bar was called. Chapter 402. There was no day in Longjurali City, only 24 hours of night. This was a pure land located in the far north, the only city in the world where death was illegal. But today, this pure land was destined to be dyed red with blood under the long polar night. Longjurali City was filled with a romantic atmosphere. This was the best time for the town's bar business. The bar music was turned up to the maximum, almost deafening people's ears. Tourists from all over the world were affected by the atmosphere and started to dance crazily on the dance floor. The air was filled with the smell of hormones. A coldly dressed woman mixed in with the crowd of men, laughing and joking. She used flirtatious words to tease the men who couldn't control themselves. When the man wanted to take a step further, the woman was like a slippery loach running to another target. The woman shuttled back and forth in the crowd. Suddenly, she saw the Asian man sitting by the bar. This man was very strange. He was only wearing a strange long robe and a thin layer of clothing. The woman guessed which country's traditional clothing was from, and her interest was piqued little by little. Since he was used to eating Western food, it would be a good experience to change his tastes once in a while. The woman treated this man as her prey tonight and sat directly next to him. There were no blondes in Tiandu. Therefore, Wuxi couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly when he sensed the woman approaching him. Interesting. Even though they didn't speak the same language, the woman's ambiguous aura floated into Wuxi's eyes. If it was in the past, Wuxi definitely wouldn't have any interest in this kind of ant-like existence. But today was different. He was here to relax. Therefore, Wuxi imitated the others and pulled the woman into his arms. The woman smiled proudly, as if she was very satisfied with her charm. However, just as the woman was about to offer her red lips and have a beautiful encounter with this mysterious Asian man, Wushu's figure mysteriously disappeared from her side. The woman was stunned for a few seconds before she let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Wushu's figure suddenly appeared above the town. It was snowing heavily outside the house, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. The visibility was less than 10 meters, but Wushu's line of sight was firmly fixed on the southeast direction. There was an extremely powerful Zhenyuan fluctuation at that location, and Wushu also sensed a trace of hostility from this wave. It was obvious that they were here for him. Seeing this, Wushu did not cower. Instead, he flew towards that direction. This was a huge iceberg that had not melted for 10,000 years. It floated on the Arctic Ocean, moving slowly with the waves. Before Wushu got close, he saw a man standing on the peak of the ice mountain with his hands behind his back. Because they had already fought before, the moment Wushu saw Jiang Yin, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise. This old thief, could it be that he was tired of living and came here to seek death? While thinking, Wushu landed on the ice mountain. At this moment, Jiang Yin slowly turned around and smiled at him. "Divine General Wushu, I haven't seen you in a long time. I missed you." When Wushu heard this, a trace of disdain appeared on his face. He first looked around, and after confirming that Chunshi was not nearby, he said coldly, "I haven't even thought of looking for you, and you're already in a hurry to die? Die? No, no, no." Jiang Yin shook his head and smiled. "Divine General, you don't know this, but I cherish my life very much. It wasn't easy for me to live for 1,000 years, so how could I give up my life so easily?" Wushu did not immediately reply because he had already noticed that something was amiss. Jiang Yan's current state was completely different from last time. Just look at how confident he is. Even if Wushu used his but to think, he knew that if he did not have a certain amount of confidence, Jiang Yin would definitely not come all the way here to die. Wushu was confident, but he was not arrogant. Last time, Wushu was forced to use the blood escape technique by Chunshi, and he had already suffered a great loss. Therefore, he would not allow himself to fail again. Fighting because of personal feelings was something that only children would do. Therefore, when Wushu saw how confident Jiang Yin was, he immediately wanted to retreat. At this moment, Wushu was very similar to Sima Yi, who was scared off by Zhuge Liang's empty city strategy. Regardless of what Jiang Yin was planning, there was still a long way to go. This debt, he would slowly settle it in the future. After figuring this out, Wushu didn't even say a single word. Instead, he turned into a streak of light and flew toward the horizon. However, at this moment, a golden barrier suddenly appeared in the air. This barrier was like a fishing net, directly trapping Wushu in it. Then, Jiang Yin's sinister laughter sounded again. "Divine General Wushu, where are you going?" Yuanying was not easy to kill. This was something that all immortal cultivators knew. Unless one's cultivation level was suppressed, if the other party was determined to escape, it was actually very difficult to catch them. This was also the reason why Wushu was able to escape from under Chunshi's nose. Wushu had already escaped once. Jiang Yin knew that Wushu had the blood escape secret technique, so he went back to the floating mist mountain to prepare. He brought the 9 Serenities' 10,000 years of savings with him just to win the first battle. Wushu should not have come here, because once he came, he would not be able to leave. Wushu's surprise gradually turned into shock when he saw more than 100 celestial beings from Daiyu Island slowly flying toward him. Among these celestial beings, there were more than 20 Yuanying. They were all at the divine general level. The rest were all above the diviner level. How is this possible? More than half of the Zhang family's 300 celestial beings were killed by him. It had only been 3 months since he last saw them. How could there be so many Yuanying? While Wushu was still in a daze, the Zhang family's celestial beings had already surrounded him, just like last time on Daiyu Island. However, this time, Wushu's mood completely changed. No. How could there be so many Yuanying in the lower realm? Who exactly are you people? Perhaps because Wushu knew that he could not escape. After taking out the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white bone soul summoning banner, he locked his gaze on Jiang Yin and tried to get an answer from Jiang Yin. But unfortunately, Jiang Yin seemed to know that villains usually died from talking too much. Thus, he did not answer any of Wushu's questions. Instead, he nodded lightly at the celestial beings present. Formation. Yin-Yang 6 Directions Formation. Activate. In an instant, the sky suddenly lit up and multicolored light filled the sky. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from Heaven Capital when Chunxi flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought the so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 serenities, including Chunxi, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Chunxi stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yin had already known of Chunxi's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yin had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Chunxi when Chunxi first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yin was guiding Chunxi, try to pull Chunxi to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yin did not know why Chunxi was working so hard to find Wushu, but he knew very well that Wushu was not just a divine general. Wushu, he was actually Yuhuan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wushu, who would face Yuhuan Tianzuan's wrath, it would not be Jiang Yin, nor would it be the 9 serenities. It would be Chunxi, who had always been at the forefront. Wushu's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yuhuan Tianzun could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, hoping that Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wushu grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wushu would always call him Yuhuan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wushu showed to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, Wushu was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yuhuan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wushu, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, he indirectly gave Wushu all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close. So, when Wushu saw the Yin-Yang 6 Directions array being activated again, a relieved smile suddenly appeared on his face. It was the same array formation, but the person who set it was completely different. Wushu held the flag in his hand, already understanding what he was about to face. So before Jiang Yin made a move, Wushu suddenly raised his head and let out a long howl. Yuhuan Tianzun, Yuhuan Tianzun, this time, I'm really going to fall. Although you can't hear me, but I'll call you again, Father. Speaking of this, Wushu's expression suddenly froze. Immediately after, he did not forget to ridicule himself. As expected, I'm not used to it after not calling you for a long time. Yuhuan Tianzuan, did you hear that? Your son is being bullied. Remember to avenge him. Father. Wushu did not say the last word out loud. Instead, he silently repeated it in his heart. Then, he raised the Wuji apricot yellow flag high up and like the only remaining flag bearer on the battlefield, he charged towards the 9 underworlds led by Jiang Yan alone. Even if the entire army was killed, the flag bearer could not fall. If he fell, it would be a true annihilation. Jiang Yan looked at Wushu coldly. Even though Wushu was surrounded, Jiang Yan did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he decisively ordered everyone to attack at the same time, not giving Wushu any chance of survival in an instant. A bloody light lit up the sky. From afar, it was as beautiful as the sunset. In the end, this piece of pure land in the extreme north was dyed red with blood. Not long after the battle began, Chun Shi, who was patrolling the South Pacific Ocean, suddenly sensed something and looked towards the north. Bai Hong was confused, so she asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong." After that, Chun Shi didn't wait for Bai Hong to respond. Chapter 404. 9 underworlds came out in full force and set up an inescapable net just to kill Wushu. Wushu was only a Yuanian cultivator. Even with all his treasures, there was no way he could defend against 20 Yuanian cultivators and countless golden core cultivators. Although Wushu knew that he had no chance of winning, he did not lose his fighting spirit. Instead, he exploded with a fighting spirit that was far stronger than before. This was the most serious battle he had ever fought in his life. Even a trapped beast would put up a fight, let alone a human. He was a divine general of Tiandu and the only son of Yuhuan Tianzuan. He represented Tiandu, so even though he knew that he would die, he had to die with dignity. Therefore, Wushu decided to burn his Yuaniing. He did not want to run anymore. The scenery at the North Pole was not bad. It would be one of the happiest things in his life to be able to sleep here. After Wushu let out a long roar, his body began to burn like firewood. At that moment, blood dyed the sky red. The sound of spells exploding could be heard continuously. It was as if the spell was playing a requiem for this arrogant and slightly neurotic man. The burning of Yuaniing would not last for long. Therefore, the battle quickly came to an end. This was a battle that seemed short, but was actually extremely tragic. Wushu thought that killing one was enough, and killing two was worth it. When he was about to die, he actually used a secret technique to detonate the yellow flag and white-boned soul summoning flag in his hands. The 2 9th-grade spirit treasures exploded at the same time, destroying the souls of the 3 Yuaniing stage cultivators closest to him on the spot. At the same time, the Yin and Yang 6 directions formation was successfully shattered, causing the spiritual energy to dissipate, which successfully attracted Chun Shi's attention. As for Wushu himself, of course, he was also turned into a wisp of smoke in the explosion. From now on, there would be no more divine general named Wushu in this world. Reporting to Yuzun, Wushu's summer mustard seed bag has been found. The formation imprint has been destroyed according to your orders. Please give us the order. Very good. Let's retreat. It's time for our old friend to take the stage. The 9 Serenities had lost 3 Yuaniing in this battle, but Jiang Yin did not seem to feel the slightest bit of heartache. Instead, he calmly ordered his men to clean up the battlefield as quickly as possible. He knew that Chun Shi would come, so he had to hide everything before Chun Shi arrived. Otherwise, where would he find such a good scapegoat? After receiving Jiang Yan's order, the generals of the 9 Serenities did not even bother to clean up the battlefield. They quietly retreated like a receding tide, leaving behind only the messy aftermath of the battle. Chun Shi rushed to the Arctic Circle as fast as he could. His intuition told him that this true essence fluctuation was not simple. But unfortunately, Chun Shi was like the police in the movies. He was always the last to arrive. By the time he arrived at the scene of the incident with Bai Hong, everything had disappeared. All that was left was a shattered ice field that seemed to have experienced a carpet bombing. Some broken spell imprints were vaguely left in the air. Chun Shi silently sensed them. He felt that these spells were familiar, but he could not tell where he had seen them before. It was very strange. It was a bit like the Jiang family's true 6 trigram spell, but it was much more exquisite. It was far beyond the level of the Jiang family. Chunshi knew the ins and outs of Daiyu Island very well, so he did not even think about Jiangyan. Therefore, he could not even figure out what had happened here. Who was fighting? What level of battle was it? Judging from the true essence fluctuation that he had sensed earlier, the level of this battle was far beyond Chun-Shi's imagination. The Battle of the Yuanying? When did Earth become so terrifying? Chun-Shi silently sensed the spell imprints in the air, trying to find some clues from them. Bai Hong, on the other hand, began a carpet search in the snow. Finally, under a pile of soft snow, Bai Hong successfully found a tattered piece of cloth about the size of a fingernail. This rag was yellow with golden threads embroidered on it. It was obviously not an ordinary item. Bai Hong picked up the tattered piece of cloth and carefully rubbed it in her hand. Immediately after, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and even his pupils couldn't help but dilate a lot. This is the Wuji apricot yellow flag. Bai Hong did not dare to believe his guess. He tried to sense some spiritual energy from it, but this rag was no different from an ordinary tablecloth. Other than the brighter color, there was nothing special about it. Under normal circumstances, magic treasures could be recycled and reused. For example, Chun-Shi had recycled Qing Wan spear. But if this magic treasure was a natal magic treasure and its owner used a secret technique to detonate it, this magic treasure would be completely destroyed. Even if it was picked up, it would take up too much space. In an instant, Bai Hong's mind went blank. After staring blankly for a long while, he began to search in the snow as if he had gone mad. Chun-Shi noticed his abnormal behavior, so he stopped what he was doing and used his divine sense to help Bai Hong search. This search was incredible. After Chun-Shi picked up a palm-sized rag from the snow, Bai Hong was stunned. It's Wushu. It's really him. Hearing this, even Chun-Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Wushu? This guy was covered with high-level magic treasures to defend himself, and he had the blood escape technique to save his life. Even he was not 100% sure that he could kill Wushu. Who on earth could do it? At the same time, the Great World. Tiandu. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was currently standing in a pavilion filled with candlelight. Next to each candle was a small wooden tablet with different names written on it. It looked like a memorial tablet in the ancestral hall. Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up one of the wooden tablets with trembling hands. The wooden tablet had the words Wushu written on it. He seemed to be a little unable to believe what he saw. So after picking up the wooden tablet and carefully touching it, Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up the candle next to it. The other candles were still burning well, but this one was extinguished. Wushu, my son, can you tell Father, what did you encounter in the lower realm? This was the heart fire lamp. Every day, when a newborn was born, the heart fire would be used as a lamp. The heart fire lamp could not be extinguished. Once it was extinguished, it meant that the owner of the lamp was dead. And this was the so-called, when the person died, the lamp went out. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan was the supreme of Tiandu, after seeing Wushu's heart fire lamp go out, he couldn't help but shed 2 lines of hot tears. But a celestial lord was a celestial lord after all. Even if the grief in his heart was extreme, he had to wait until this grief subsided before he stepped out of the attic again. Pass down my orders. Order the 5 divine generals to return immediately and take the heaven-bearing, efficacious, floating mirror. Build the soul bridge. Open the gate of heaven. Chapter 405. Following the extinguishment of the heart flame lamp, Yuhuan Tianzuan, in a fit of rage, officially put the opening of the divine gate on the agenda. For a moment, the great world was in a state of panic and trepidation. Under the influence of the 9 underworlds, the seemingly tranquil earth gradually became turbulent and unpredictable, with undercurrents surging. Chun-Shi had always wanted to stay out of this, but he did not know that he had already become a chess piece in Jiang Yan's hands. He and Bai Hong searched the Arctic tundra for a long time before they finally had to believe Wushu was most likely dead. Otherwise, how could they explain the destruction of the Wuji apricot yellow flag? If it wasn't a last resort, no one would detonate their life source magic weapon. This was a 9th grade spiritual treasure. Once combined with the other 4 flags, It could form a treasure comparable to the Tianyin sword. Therefore, Chun-Shi really could not understand. Who on earth could have forced Wushu to such a state? If even Chun-Shi could not figure it out, Bai Hong naturally could not figure it out either. Changli's death at Chun-Shi's hands was pardonable. After all, the three of them together were no match for Chun-Shi, not to mention Changli alone. During this period of time, Chun-Shi had been with Bai Hong, so Wushu's murderer was definitely not Chun-Shi. But then who could it be? Other than the heavenly venerate, Bai Hong really could not think of anyone else who had such ability. When did the lower realm become so dangerous? Chun-Shi and Bai Hong had the same question in their hearts. But the most important question was not this question, but now that Wushu was dead, where should they go to find the soul mirror? Chun-Shi had no choice but to bring Bai Hong back to Shangjing and let him see Qin Ruoying, who was still in a coma. Qin Ruoying had been in a coma for more than half a month. During this time, she had not woken up. Her pulse and breathing were still normal, so she looked like a vegetable. Chun-Shi could not accept this result. Neither could Yin. Therefore, Chun-Shi clearly told Bai Hong, if Ying did not wake up, then he could only bring Bai Hong to the Divine Gate personally. Bai Hong followed Chun-Shi to the kindergarten to sneak a peek at the cute little fellow and completely believed Chun-Shi's words. But unfortunately, Bai Hong was just an ordinary divine general, so his knowledge was limited. Therefore, after seeing Qin Ruoying's condition, he could only frown and analyze. After Changli went missing, Yuan Tianzuan gave the soul mirror to Master so that he could send people to the lower realm at any time. Master loved, of Wushu Master's Master. Fong of Wushu of heaven, of Wushu of heaven, of the divine of heaven, of Wus of heavens. Speaking of this, Bai Hong suddenly stopped and then put on a thoughtful expression. At this point, Bai Hong already knew that Chun-Shi had fought with Wushu and forced him to use the blood escape technique. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he continued, I didn't know that Wushu had already descended. Since you forced Wushu to use the blood escape technique, he must have been severely injured. Wushu couldn't force open the Divine Gate on his own, so he stayed in the lower realm to recuperate. And you just said that your wife has been unconscious for half a month, if that's the case. The soul mirror can't be in Wushu's hands. He must have left the soul mirror in Divine Capital before. He descended. Hearing this, Chun-Shi was stunned. Wasn't this F*** nonsense? After going in such a big circle, he still had to enter the Divine Gate to solve the problem? Chun-Shi's patience had run out. So without saying a word, he pulled Bai Hong and flew directly to the sky above Shangjing City. Opening the Divine Gate required a spirit energy tide, right? There was no spirit energy tide now, right? At most, he could artificially create a spirit energy tide. Chun-Shi had already thought it through. He was not going to Divine Capital to fight, but to reason with them. As long as he could solve Ying's illness, he didn't even mind becoming friends with Divine Capital. A soul formation stage cultivator had taken the initiative to express his goodwill. Presumably, any faction with a brain wouldn't refuse. Bai Hong was shocked by Chun-Shi's courage. He was imprisoned by Chun-Shi for more than half a year, and he dreamed of returning to Divine Capital. Seeing that Chun-Shi took the initiative to take him back, Bai Hong was naturally happy, so he wanted Chun-Shi to bring Qing Yuan and Shui Xiang along. As long as the three of them could return to Divine Capital safely, Bai Hong promised to let bygones be bygones. He was also willing to recommend Chun-Shi so that Chun-Shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror. After all, Chun-Shi just wanted to borrow the soul mirror, not occupy it permanently, so the heavenly venerables wouldn't be so stingy. The two reached a consensus. Then, Chun-Shi used himself as the eye of the formation and the entire Shangjing City as the formation pattern to forcibly set off a huge spirit energy storm in the sky. A steady stream of spirit energy rushed to the center of the storm. In less than a while, this storm evolved into a turbulent tide of spiritual energy. Taking advantage of the gap between Chun-Shi's maintenance of the tide, Bai Hong hid at the side and frantically grasped the spirit energy of heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the spirit energy, Bai Hong's skin gradually became white and rosy, so much so that he looked much younger. Chunshi used his own vital essence to gather the tide. This action was like reaching into a water tank and stirring it, forming a water spout in the water. The whole process didn't require too much effort, so Chunshi could persist for a long time. But he didn't know the reason. Chunshi maintained it from noon to afternoon. The tide was getting bigger and bigger, but the divine gate still didn't open. Now that Nian was about to finish school, Chunshi hesitated again and again, and finally had to temporarily withdraw his vital essence. Then, he turned to look at Bai Hong and asked, "What's the situation? Why hasn't the divine gate opened?" Hearing this, Bai Hong also looked around in confusion. It didn't make sense. Wushu's life and death were unknown. Didn't Yuhuan Tianzuan send someone down to check the situation? There were two conditions to open the divine gate. One was the appearance of a powerful spirit energy tide in the lower realm, and the other was the heavenly effecate floating mirror. Under normal circumstances, once a spirit energy tide appeared in the lower realm, Tiandu would use the heavenly effecate floating mirror to open the divine gate so that sinners in the lower realm could ascend. Of course, Tiandu would also occasionally send divine generals down to the lower realm to carry out various missions, such as Bai Hong and Wushu. Wushu's identity was extraordinary. How could Yuhuan Tianzuan, as his father, not be worried at all? I don't know. Maybe something happened up there. Why don't we try again tomorrow? Chunshi was speechless. After glaring fiercely at Bai Hong, he flew back to Shangjing City without a word. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly chased after him and asked, "Hey, where are you going?" "To pick up my child from school." "Why didn't the divine gate open?" "That was because Tiandu was using the soul mirror as the core to prepare to build a soul bridge." Wushu's unexpected death made Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been hesitating, finally make up his mind. Because of this, the heavenly venerables also reached a consensus. So when the soul bridge was completed, Chapter 406, January 26th. The little girl, who had been in kindergarten for a semester, finally welcomed the first winter break in her life. Before the break, the teacher held a class meeting to remind the parents of the things to pay attention to during the break. At the same time, she gave the children a winter break homework. The winter break homework of the kindergarten was naturally not as exaggerated as that of the middle school. At most, it was only 2 or 3 pages. The content was mainly to write numbers from memory, review pinyin, memorize nursery rhymes, and so on. She only hoped that the children would not forget all the things the teacher taught after the winter break. "Goodbye, teacher. I'll miss you. Nian, good girl. I'll wait for you at school. See you next semester. Goodbye." The little girl nodded her little head like she was pounding garlic. After waving goodbye to the teacher reluctantly, she turned her head to look at the 2 brothers. Now that the 2 brothers were sent to and from school by Xia Kaiji, they naturally could not go to school with her every day. Now that the winter break was finally here, the 3 children agreed to meet at the tea house tomorrow and then go to the ice rink to play. "Wenwen, Mingming, see you tomorrow." The little girl held Chunshi's hand and waited very politely until Xia Kaiji's car started. Then, she turned around and followed Chunshi home. The closer it was to the end of the year, the more deserted Shangjing City seemed. Every time the little girl breathed, she would exhale a stream of hot air. She thought it was very fun, so from time to time, she would raise her little head and then imitate the dubbing in the short video. She would pout her mouth and shout a Chinibu line. "The evil dragon roars, a whoop a whoop." The little girl was like a cute little sun. Even in this cold winter, she could still bring some warmth to Chunshi. The father and daughter held hands and walked slowly on the street. Before Chunshi could find a topic to talk about, the little girl asked first as usual, "Daddy, is Mommy better today?" "Yes, she's better. She just got up and steamed some soup dumplings for you. When you get home, it'll be ready." Chunshi gently squeezed the little girl's little hand, and a bright smile appeared on his face. The little girl did not have any doubts about this. This was because the food her mother made tasted obviously different from the food her father made. She could tell. When it came to eating, the little thing was obviously a little greedy, so it shook Chun-Chi's arm and laughed. Mommy soup dumplings are also very delicious. I can eat 3. Really? Daddy will bring you 3 in a while. You have to finish them all. No problem. Chun-Chi carefully coaxed the little fellow. He didn't want Yin Yin to know that Qin Ruoying had been sick in bed, so he deliberately cooked ordinary food from time to time to deceive the little girl and tell her that it was her mother who cooked it. At first, the little fellow was naturally convinced, but after a long time, the little fellow still felt a little strange. Since her mother could wake up to cook for her, why couldn't she wait until school was over before going to bed? The little guy blinked his big eyes and suddenly realized, I haven't talked to my mother for a long time. Every time she came home, her mother was sleeping, so she could only watch TV silently. She didn't dare to run around the room because she was afraid of disturbing her mother. Ever since her mother fell ill, the house had become a lot more deserted. It was just that the little fellow was still young, so she didn't understand the true meaning of the word deserted. Daddy, when will Mommy get better? Soon. The doctor said that Mommy doesn't have any major problems. She just needs to rest for a period of time to recover. Similar conversations kept repeating. The little fellow was distressed because of her mother's illness. How could Chun-Chi not be distressed? He would set off a spirit energy tide in the sky above Shangjing City every day, but he had never seen the divine gate open. Therefore, Chun-Chi's heart tightened. He just wanted to go to Tiandu to seek a soul mirror to cure Qin Ruoying's illness. Why did the divine gate refuse to open? Did he have to wait for the spirit energy tide to appear naturally? She was very distressed. But this kind of distress couldn't be shown in front of the little fellow. Therefore, he felt as if his heart was being pressed under a big rock, and he almost couldn't breathe. When would these days come to an end? She talked to the little fellow as he secretly pondered. The father and daughter soon returned home. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Bai Hong walking back and forth in the courtyard, so she took the initiative to wave at him and smiled. Uncle Bai, good afternoon. I'm out of school. Hearing this, Bai Hong seemed to have something on her mind. After forcing a smile at the little fellow, she looked at Chun-Chi with a face full of apprehension. For the sake of convenience, Chun-Chi left Bai Hong in the courtyard for this period of time. With the restriction guarding, he wasn't afraid of Bai Hong stirring up any storms. After all, this guy just burned his yuanying and was almost a cripple now. Chun-Chi and Bai Hong looked at each other, but found that Bai Hong's expression was very strange today. It seemed like he was afraid of something. Why would Bai Hong be afraid? This guy didn't even care about his life. Why would he be afraid? Thinking of this, Chun-Chi asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you?" However, after hearing Chun-Chi's question, Bai Hong seemed to be agitated and couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 407. What the hell was going on? Chun-Chi's mind went blank, leaving only this question echoing in his heart. No pulse, no breathing, no heartbeat. Even the blood had stopped flowing. In medical terms, death in the absolute sense meant that there was no heartbeat and the brain was dead. At this moment, Qin Ruoying completely fit this description. So in terms of scientific theory, she was already dead. And this was what Chun-Chi couldn't figure out at all. It wasn't an exaggeration to say, even if the entire human race died, Qin Ruoying couldn't die. Not to mention that Qin Ruoying's cultivation had already reached the diviner level, and she was immune to all kinds of poisons. Moreover, she had Chun-Chi, a high-level immortal cultivator, by her side to take care of her. Her heartbeat had stopped, right? Then let the heart beat again. Her blood had stopped flowing? Then let the blood flow again. Chun-Chi tried to use his true essence to forcefully awaken Qin Ruoying's body. This method was indeed effective. Qin Ruoying's heart began to beat slowly, and her breathing gradually stabilized. But once Chun-Chi withdrew his true essence, Qin Ruoying's body immediately stopped functioning like a machine that had lost power. Everything was because her soul had dissipated. Qin Ruoying didn't condense a golden core, and she didn't have yuanying. The dissipation of her soul meant that she was completely dead, and even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to save her. Ying died, just like that. Chun-Shi stared blankly at his lover's face. In a trance, he actually remembered the bits and pieces of their past. Since Zhonghai University, the two of them had known each other and loved each other. Although they didn't verbally promise to grow old together, they both hid that promise deep in their hearts. Please take care of me for the rest of my life. Except for Chun-Shi's sudden disappearance for 5 years, the two of them hadn't experienced many storms in their relationship. Chun-Shi returned from the heavenly Jade Realm after a long and arduous journey. What welcomed him was the precious baby that Ying had left behind for him. Chun-Yin. My name is Chun-Yin. You can call me Yin-Yin. Chun-Yin, Chun-Yin. He was filled with longing. Later on, Chun-Shi took Yin-Yin to look for Qin Ruoying all over the world. When the two met again after 500 years, Ying directly gave him a slap in the face. At the same time, she also said her wish. May you leave for half your life and return as a young man. How could there be no twists and turns in life? However, from the moment the family of three reunited, all the hardships Chun-Shi had experienced had turned into dust, swept into the garbage heap by him. Chun-Shi had no attachment to the past because the future was right beside him. Undying love was not something that could be proven by martyrdom. A heart full of love was not something that could only be heard when it was always on the tip of the tongue. The highest level of love, actually, it was just that old saying, holding your hand, growing old with you. That was all. If you win, I am willing to accompany you to rule the world. If you lose, I am willing to accompany you to make a comeback. When I rule the world, I will spread 10 miles of red dowry. I am willing to use 10 miles of red dowry as a gift, and I am willing to use the world as a betrothal gift. Are you willing to rule the world and spend the rest of your life with me? Chun-Shi did not strive for the world, so Ying accompanied him in a small tea house by Ho-Hai. When she had nothing to do, she would flip through books, take care of the children, and watch the flowers bloom and wilt in front of the courtyard with her lover. She would gaze at the clouds and the sky. Was there anything more blissful in the world than this? Chun-Shi could answer with absolute certainty. Absolutely not. But now his happy life had completely turned into bubbles. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi could not help but suddenly wake up from his memories. Only then did he realize that his face was already covered in tears. He gently lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Only then did he hold his lover's hand and solemnly promise, Ying, wait for me. There was no need to say more with just these 4 words. Even if I can't reincarnate in this life, I will still create havoc in the underworld and strike your name from the book of life and death. The little fellow stood in the courtyard with a blank face. Where did Daddy run off to? She looked around and did not see Chun-Shi's figure. Carrying her small bag, she eagerly ran towards the west wing. But just as she was about to step on the stairs, an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. Bai Hong, tell me, what is going on? The little fellow was startled by this thunderous roar and almost fell to the ground. If it were not for the big cat's quick-wittedness and supported her from behind, this little fellow would probably have fallen to the ground and rolled several times. The little fellow was still in a state of shock. Before she could regain her senses, she suddenly felt a strong gust of wind blowing from behind. The cold wind burrowed into the little fellow's back and immediately made her shiver. She hurriedly looked back and found that Uncle Bai, who was still in a daze in the courtyard just now, was nowhere to be seen. The little fellow was frightened by this strange atmosphere and carried the big cat directly into the west wing. At the same time, she did not forget to shout, Daddy? Daddy? Where are you? Daddy is in the sky. Because the little fellow was in the courtyard just now, Chun-Shi was furious and directly grabbed Bai Hong's neck and lifted him into the sky. Cough, cough, cough. I don't know either. Everything was fine just now, but suddenly there was no breath, Bai Hong struggled to reply. This time he was really sitting at home, but the trouble came from the sky. Bai Hong was, after all, a divine general. Although his cultivation was not even a tenth of it, his five senses were still very sharp. Just now, he was meditating in the room to heal his wounds when he suddenly discovered that there was no breath in the West Wing. He wanted to go in to check on the situation, but was blocked by the restriction set up by Chun-Shi, so he could only wait in the courtyard for Chun-Shi to return. It was fine if Chun-Shi did not come back, but this time, he had almost lost his life. In reality, Chun-Shi also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Bai Hong. He even guessed that this definitely had something to do with the spirit mirror. Otherwise, who in this world would be able to cause Ying's soul to scatter without a sound? I'll tell you, if anything happens to Ying, I'll definitely bury your Tiandu with her. Chun-Shi was like an enraged lion, roaring at Bai Hong. Without waiting for Bai Hong to explain, he directly dragged Bai Hong and flew toward the Pacific Ocean. Although Bai Hong was not afraid of death, Qin Ruoying's current situation clearly had something to do with Tiandu, so he more or less felt that he could not face Chun-Shi. So, Bai Hong obediently kept his mouth shut, waiting to see what Chun-Shi wanted to do next. Chun-Shi was angry, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Since Ying's soul had dissipated, the most important thing now was not to directly find her soul, but to find a way to protect Ying's physical body. Chun-Shi could not stay by Qin Ruoying's side at all times to help her maintain her physical body, so he urgently needed a magic treasure now, and that was Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. Therefore, after arriving at the deep-sea cave, Chun-Shi frantically poured his vital essence into the large ice block that sealed Shui Xiang. As long as Shui Xiang's injuries were slightly relieved, her frozen state would naturally be lifted. Under Chun-Shi's continuous pouring of vital essence, the ice block gradually melted, and Shui Xiang suddenly fell from it. During this period of time, Shui Xiang had been in a state of suspended animation, so she did not know what happened outside. Therefore, the moment she woke up, she directly launched an attack at Chun-Shi. Shui Xiang, stop. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly shouted to stop, but Chun-Shi's action was much faster than his voice. Shui Xiang did not even use the first move, and Chun-Shi had already inserted countless spirit needles into her body. Shui Xiang's almond-shaped eyes widened, and after glaring at Chun-Shi fiercely, her body completely softened. At this time, Bai Hong on the side let out a long sigh of relief. He was not afraid of death, but he was very afraid of his junior brothers and sisters dying for no reason. Fortunately, Chun-Shi did not intend to take her life. Take her, let's go. Chun-Shi grabbed the blue wave silk gauze, left a sentence coldly, and turned to walk out of the cave. Hearing this, Bai Hong hurriedly helped Shui Xiang up from the ground, and then followed Chun-Shi's pace. Looking at the man in front of him who was silent on the surface, but his heart was filled with indignation, Bai Hong knew. Chapter 408. After leaving the cave in the deep sea, Chun-Shi did not rush back to Shangjing immediately. Instead, he flew to Daiyu Island. He had no choice. After all, Bai Hong did not know anything about it. Furthermore, the Divine Gate had not opened for a long time. Even if Chun-Shi wanted to go to Heaven Capital, there was no way in. Therefore, he could only pin his hopes on Jiangyan. He wanted to see if he could find a better solution from Jiangyan. Therefore, Chun-Shi led Bai Hong and Shui Xiang straight to Daiyu Island. As soon as they got close to Daiyu Island, Chun-Shi suddenly realized that Daiyu Island's mountain guarding formation had become stronger. Previously, this heavenly dipper array was simply dispensable. Even Wuxiu could easily break it, let alone him. After not being here for a while, this formation had been strengthened by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Even if Chun-Shi wanted to break the formation, he would have to spend a long time outside. Seeing this, Chun-Shi suddenly had a guess in her heart. Jiang Yin was probably afraid of Wuxiu. That was why he strengthened the mountain guarding formation to prevent the same tragedy from happening again. Out of politeness, Chun-Shi did not choose to break the formation by force. Instead, he waited patiently outside. He did not have to wait for long before the formation slowly opened. Ha ha ha. Mr. Chen, how have you been? I wonder why you've come all the way to Daiyu Island today. Before Jiang Yin even arrived, the enthusiastic greeting rang through the air above Daiyu Island. Hearing this, Chunshi smiled and replied, I'm sorry for coming uninvited. No, I haven't seen you for a few days. I really miss your elegance. Please follow me into the house for a chat, Mr. Chun. A white light flashed, and Jiang Yin appeared in front of Chunshi. Seeing his warm and welcoming face, Chunshi smiled and greeted him politely. At this time, Jiang Yan's gaze landed on Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. Who are these two? Chunshi knew that Jiang Yan had a grudge against Tiandu, so he deliberately concealed it. They're my friends. They came with me to visit Daiyu Island. Oh, so that's how it is. Please come in. Jiang Yan laughed and made an inviting gesture to the three of them. Then he took the lead to fly to serene Afterglow Peak. Chunshi thought that he had deceived Jiang Yan, but he did not know that Jiang Yan had already known everything about Tiandu. With just a glance, he had already determined the identities of Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. However, with this old fox's shrewdness, how could he be easily seen through by Chunshi when he was caught off guard? Therefore, the old man pretended that he didn't see anything and led the way. Chunshi followed behind Jiang Yan. In the process of flying to serene Afterglow Peak, he suddenly realized that the atmosphere of Daiyu Island was very different from before. Previously, Daiyu Island was like a paradise. Then he sighed and said, The Arbiter of Fate Xiannu is truly pitiful. Actually, I already received the news just now. Not only your wife, but also the other Arbiter of Fate Xiannu who are still alive. Even the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu who is over 30 years old and has already stepped down, at the same time, their souls have been scattered. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Yin stole a glance at Chunshi. However, he saw that Chunshi's face was terrifyingly gloomy. It was as if water was about to drip out of it. Seeing that, Jiang Yin could not help but feel secretly happy. Seeing that Chunshi did not seem to understand the reason behind this, Jiang Yin pretended to sigh deeply. Then, he turned around and walked to the back of the ancestral hall. He took out an ancient book. This is the record of the Divine Gate that the Jiang family's ancestors wrote. Originally, it was not supposed to be read by an outsider. However, this concerns your wife, so I'll make an exception this time. Sir, please read it yourself. Jiang Yin directly handed the ancient book to Chunshi. After that, Chunshi began to read 10 lines at a time. The first half of the ancient book was about how the Jiang family became a sinner. Chunshi was not interested in this at all, so he directly flipped to the back. When it came to the Tai Ching's sacred ancestor, he began to read word by word seriously. As for the origin of the Divine Gate, Chunshi had already learned more or less from Jiang Yin and Bai Hong. The ancient book only made further additions. However, these are not important. There is only one important thing in Chunshi's eyes, and that was the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu. The reason why the Jiang family did not have the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was actually because of this ancient book. Perhaps it was because the Jiang family's ancestors and the Tai Ching's sacred ancestor were enemies. So the ancient book unceremoniously pointed out that the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was a backup plan left by the Tai Ching's sacred ancestor for Tiandu. Back then, the sacred ancestor sacrificed Xiannu's soul to lead the ancient immortal cultivators to the Great World. However, the Great World was only a small plane, far inferior to the large plane that Earth itself was in. Therefore, the sacred ancestor promised, as long as the descendants of sinners reached the celestial realm, they could ascend to the Great World. The purpose was to let the sinners of the lower realm provide an endless supply of Arbiter of Fate Xiannu for Tiandu. As long as the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu was not cut off, then the ancient immortal cultivators could once again build a soul bridge and return to Earth. This had to be mentioned. Only when the tide surged could Tiandu use the soul mirror to open the Divine Gate, allowing the Celestials to ascend. This gate relied purely on the power of the tide to open, so only a few people could enter at a time. Hungry, right? Let's go. Daddy will take you to cook. Unlike usual, Chunshi didn't apologize to the little girl immediately this time, but carried her directly to the kitchen. The little girl naturally didn't notice this difference. As soon as she heard that her father was going to make delicious food for her, this little girl instantly threw all her worries to the back of her head, then excitedly rode on Chunshi's shoulder, smiling as she waited for her father to make delicious food for her. Soon, the father and daughter had a full meal. After filling her stomach, the little girl clung to Chunshi's side, as usual, then pulled Chunshi to watch cartoons with her. But because her biological clock hadn't been adjusted before 9 o'clock, the little girl kept yawning. Seeing this, Chunshi led her to the bathroom, then washed her up. Wash clean, put on a nice towel, lie on the bed. Hey! Maybe because she was in a good mood, the little girl even hummed the little song that the teacher taught her. Looking at her innocent and cute appearance, Chunshi's face finally showed a trace of a smile from the bottom of his heart. However, this trace of smile didn't last long. When Chunshi carried the little girl back to the bed, watching the little girl as usual, tiptoeing to Chinruing's side and lying down, Chunshi could no longer suppress the raging emotions in his heart, and tears suddenly flowed out. This had nothing to do with cultivation. It was the truest feeling in his heart at this moment. In order to prevent the little girl from seeing him, Chunshi used an illusion to cover his face. Daddy, tell me a story. Just one. After hearing it, I'll go to sleep obediently. Okay, since you're so obedient, Daddy will tell you too. Mua, Daddy is so good. So, Chunshi hugged the little girl and softly told her a simple and childish story one after another in her ear. It wasn't until the little guy fell asleep that Chunshi finally stopped. He quietly looked at the two most important women in his life. They slept sweetly and peacefully, and nothing could disturb them. Just as Chunshi had once promised. Even if the sky collapses, I'll hold it up for you. I'm Yingying's husband, and also Ninyin's father. For Yingying, he couldn't let Tiandu build a soul bridge, because the moment the soul bridge was formed, Yingying's soul would scatter. So he had to dare to go to Tiandu before the soul bridge was built to ask for an explanation for his lover. But if he went, he didn't know when he would come back, because he wasn't completely sure. And this was also the first time since Chunshi returned that he did something he wasn't sure of. But he had to do it. Chunshi wouldn't leave quietly, so he had to accompany Ninian for a night and tell her everything tomorrow. In order to save Mommy, Daddy had to leave temporarily for a while. Ninian, wait for me. He doesn't have enough energy to play with you. Promise Daddy that you'll listen to Grandpa in the future, okay? Chunshi gently held Ninian in his arms and whispered many things into her ear. He knew that Ninian might not be able to remember it, but he had no choice. He still had to say these words to Ninian. This was Daddy's reluctance and also his parting words. The little fellow was still young, so she did not know what Chunshi's words meant. She only remembered one thing, and that was Daddy was leaving. He was going to a very, very far place. Because Mom was sick, Daddy had to find a way to treat Mom. The little fellow knew what was important. So even if she was a little unhappy, she did not cry and make a fuss to stop Chunshi from leaving. Instead, she looked up and asked seriously, Daddy, how long will you be away? When will you come back? As soon as this question came out, Chunshi fell silent. After a long silence, he reluctantly squeezed out a smile and said to the little fellow, It won't be long. You know, Daddy has been abroad before. Now that I have experience, I should be able to come back soon. The little fellow nodded as if she had understood something. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she hurriedly asked, Dad, what should I do if I miss you? Hearing this, Chunshi fell silent again, because he really did not know how to answer. Should he continue to deceive her? Or should he cruelly tell her the truth? Once he left, he didn't know when he would see him again. Just thinking about it was enough to break his heart. The little fellow saw that she did not answer for a long time. After blinking her eyes, she thought of a solution for herself. Daddy, if I miss you, then I'll video call you. Okay. Looking at the little fellow's expectant eyes, Chunshi finally nodded decisively this time. This was a solution he did not think of. Now that technology was developing so rapidly, it should not be difficult to simulate his image and deceive the little fellow, right? The father and daughter had a lot of private conversations today. They talked from morning till afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the little fellow, led by Qin Yongyin, personally sent Chun-Shi to the door. She tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss Chun-Shi's left and right cheeks. Then she said with a reluctant face, "Daddy, you have to come back early. I'll miss you." "Okay, Daddy promises you." While speaking, Chun-Shi gently left a kiss on the little fellow's forehead. The father and daughter parted ways. Chun-Shi strode away and did not look back along the way. But until his figure disappeared at the end of the alley, the little fellow was still waving her little hand in the direction he left. "Daddy, come back early." After saying goodbye to the little fellow and making a series of preparations, Chun-Shi took Bai Hong and Shui Xiang back to the familiar place, Karakoram Kunlun, the closest place to heaven. Chun-Shi found the ruins of the sundial temple based on his memory, then sat down cross-legged in the middle of the ruins. Sitting down, he sat for a whole 3 days and 3 nights. It was not until the morning of the 4th day that Chun-Shi finally woke up from his meditation and took out the sound-transmitting talisman that Jiang Yin gave him from his bosom. This was a sound-transmitting talisman that could directly contact Tiandu. It was a rare stock from ancient times. He did not know where Jiang Yin got it from. Right now, Tiandu was preparing to build a soul bridge. No matter how turbulent the spiritual qi in the lower realm was, it was impossible for Tiandu to withdraw the soul mirror that was in use. Since the gate of heaven refused to open, then Chun-Shi could only think of a way to forcibly open the gate of heaven himself. This sound-transmitting talisman became the key, because he wanted to use this sound-transmitting talisman to locate the position of Tiandu and thus pry open the gate of heaven. This was also the solution that Chun-Shi and Jiang Yin finally came up with after a detailed discussion. Since the moment Qin Ruoying's soul dissipated, Bai Hong had been reduced to a prisoner again. So he could only be locked to one side, like Shui Xiang, anxiously watching Chun-Shi's strange actions. They saw, after Chun-Shi ignited the talisman, he leaped into the air. Then, under the dumbfounded expressions of the two people, Chun-Shi held the flowing cloud sword in his hand, mobilized all the vital essence in his body, and fiercely slashed at the sky. In an instant, the mountains shook, the wind and snow trembled. After 3 days of meditation, Chun-Shi gathered all the vital essence in his body to one point. The moment the sword was drawn, the whole world fell silent. Immediately after, the sword qi grew bigger and bigger. Every time it flew up a meter, the sword qi would violently expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. As the sword qi continued to expand, it finally showed a kind of earth-shattering momentum, rolling up all the fluttering snowflakes between heaven and earth, like a pillar that supported the heavens, crashing into the clouds. Only then did Bai Hong suddenly widen his eyes, finally understanding what Chun-Shi was doing. He was going to use his own strength. If Qin Ruoying's soul really dissipated in front of his eyes, and he could only watch helplessly, it seemed that Chun-Shi would never forgive himself in this lifetime. Thus, he had no choice but to take the risk and forcefully open the passageway between the two worlds with his soul formation stage cultivation base. It must be mentioned here, opening and opening were two completely different concepts. The grand pure divine ancestor had built enough connections between the two realms, so Chun-Shi didn't need to open up another channel. He only needed to open up the channel that was originally closed. Just like unblocking the sewers with the sound transmission talisman as the coordinates and the glorious sundial temple as the starting point. After 3 days of recuperation, Chun-Shi had accurately found the entry point between the big world and Earth through the voice-transmitting talisman. That was why he had made such a shocking move today. with his own strength. He opened the divine gate with his sword. Not long after the sword light was slashed out, Bai Hong's eyes suddenly widened. His lips trembled as he wanted to say something. But after moving his lips for a long time, he still couldn't say a word. This feeling, Bai Hong, was too familiar. It was the divine gate. The divine gate was really about to open. As expected, the moment the sword light disappeared, a violent storm suddenly blew up on the peak of the snow mountain where the three of them were. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed from the void. Bai Hong took a closer look and found that although this light was much smaller than what they had seen in the past, the feeling it gave him was no different from the divine gate in his impression. The divine gate was actually forcefully opened by someone. Bai Hong looked at Chun Shi not far away with a shocked expression. At this moment, Chun Shi's slightly tired face finally revealed a gratified smile. This sword strike used 120% of his strength. After the sword strike, Chun Shi was like an ordinary person who had just finished a marathon. He was sweating profusely, gasping for breath, and his mental state looked a little dispirited. However, just as Chun Shi was about to smile, this light door was like a candle flame in the wind, and it began to shrink rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Chun Shi couldn't help but tremble. Are you kidding me? The divine gate was going to close so soon. In a hurry, Chun Shi didn't even have time to adjust his breathing. He grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and rushed into the light door as fast as he could. The three of them successfully rushed into the light door. Then this light door was like a broken light bulb. It suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling light and then disappeared completely. Everything returned to silence. The wind and snow once again drifted on the peak of the snow mountain. The whistling cold wind continued to blow, and the snow quickly covered the traces left by the three of them. At the same time, floating Mist Mountain, which was also located in Karakoram Kunlun, but little known to people, Jiang Yin was standing on the peak of the mountain with his hands behind his back. He stared in the direction of a light pillar with his sharp eyes. After the light pillar finally disappeared, Jiang Yin closed his eyes and carefully sensed it. That powerful aura disappeared. After confirming that there was no mistake, Jiang Yan's mouth suddenly curved into a faint smile. Then, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became more and more brilliant. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Back to Chun Shi and the other two. When Chun Shi grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and plunged into the light door, his vision suddenly turned dark. Like a loach plunging headfirst into the mud, behind the light door, there was no light, no wind. There was no sound. Chun Shi couldn't see anything. Wherever his divine sense went, it was empty in all directions. It was like a vacuum bag. There wasn't even any air here. Thus, Chun Shi reached out and lit up a ball of light. But after the ball of light lit up, Chun Shi still couldn't see anything. Other than his body, there was only endless darkness in this dark space. Where are the two of them? Chun Shi looked around and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang were personally captured by him and entered the heavenly gate. But after entering the door, Chun Shi's connection with the two of them was completely cut off. Chun Shi thought that he had been ambushed and subconsciously wanted to draw his sword, but he found that he had lost the flowing cloud sword at some point in time. Right now, he was only left with the training clothes he wore when he set off. Chun Shi had no choice but to search aimlessly in this dark space. But after flying for a long time, he still hadn't reached the end. Along the way, there was nothing in the range of his divine sense. There was no other way. Chun Shi could only try to fly down. But after flying for a long time, he couldn't find the ground. Chun Shi thought that his sense of direction was wrong, so he flew horizontally again. This time, he still flew for a long time. Chun Shi still didn't fly to the border. Where is Tiandu? Where did Bai Hong and Shui Xiang go? What is this place? Chun Shi was a little flustered. Everything in front of him was completely beyond his imagination. How to describe that feeling? He was now like a wisp of dust floating in the universe. But there were no planets in this universe, let alone anything that could be called an object apart from him. This universe was a complete vacuum, leaving behind only boundless darkness. "Let me out! I beg you." His voice was loud and impassioned at first, but it gradually became low and hoarse. In the end, it completely turned into a feeble and pitiful pleading. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. She was in complete despair. He was like a puppet that had lost its soul. He floated numbly in the darkness, as silent as a corpse. If someone were to approach his body, they would hear his mouth squirming. He could still speak, but he just kept repeating this sentence. "It's too late. Too late, too late, too late." 10 years had passed. Ying's soul should have long dissipated. Even if he were to be let out now, it was too late. It was hopeless. It was already hopeless. Shi clearly remembered every detail when he was with Ying. It was also because of this that the sweetness of the past had now become a sharp knife that ruthlessly slashed at his heart again and again. Self-blame, pain, regret, sadness, anxiety, worry, irritation, frustration, anger, all the negative emotions of human beings were gathered in Shi's heart at this moment. If it was possible, he would rather die than stay in this boundless darkness. Fortunately, Shi still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Last year, today, in this door, human faces and peach blossoms were rosy. I don't know where the human faces are, but the peach blossoms are still smiling in the spring breeze. He had already parted with Ying once. He had stayed in Heavenly Spiral for 500 years, but only 5 years had passed on Earth. Who knew how many years a year in this godforsaken place was equivalent to on Earth? Thinking of this, Shi couldn't help but erupt with an extremely strong will to live. Yes, before determining the time difference between the two worlds, how could he give up on himself? Before the moment the truth was revealed, how could he be hit by his own negative emotions first? Shi sat cross-legged again. He didn't want to think about those things anymore. Instead, he began to repeatedly ponder the mystery of this dark space. Since this dark space could trap an immortal cultivator at the peak of the soul formation realm, it meant that this space was definitely extraordinary. Shi directly ruled out the possibility that Tiandu was behind this. It wasn't that he looked down on Tiandu, but that Tiandu really didn't have that ability. Even if the Grand Pure One was alive, it was absolutely impossible for him to play with him in the palm of his hand like this. As such, after pondering over it again and again, Shi suddenly had a guess in his heart. Could it be that there was an accident when he opened the heavenly gate with his sword, and that was why he barged into this endless dark space? Came uninvited? Waiting for him? Or catching a turtle in a jar? He hadn't comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he didn't understand what was needed to cross the two worlds. A huge amount of vital essence. Chapter 413. Children don't remember things. Once there's something happy, they'll quickly throw their worries aside. Yin is naturally the same. It's just that her happiness is like the tide, always coming in waves. After the tide recedes, there will still be a large beach full of holes poked by stone crabs. It's impossible for the little fellow to stay excited forever. Therefore, every night when she goes to bed, it's the time of the day when she misses her father the most. She was still telling her stories in the video, but the little girl didn't fall asleep after listening to it like she used to. She always asks her father to finish one story after another, as if she has inexhaustible energy. Every time this happens, Qin Yongyan will silently wait at the side. It wasn't until Chanshi on the other end of the video repeatedly ordered the little guy to sleep that the little guy would pout and lie back on the bed. At this time, Qin Yongyan will turn off the light and quietly leave the West Wing. Qin Yongyan once thought of bringing the little fellow to live with him in the main room, but the little fellow is unwilling no matter what. She wants to sleep with her mother, although her mother never responds to her. The little fellow has been staying in this courtyard full of spiritual energy, surrounded by all the cultivators above the celestial being stage. Under normal circumstances, the little fellow should have already become a child genius. But she didn't, because Chunshi has already placed a seal on her. The little fellow's intelligence has always been at the level of a normal person. Chunshi only wants to give Nian a normal childhood. He doesn't want her to become a weirdo among her peers. Chunshi's reason for doing this is very good. Just like what Jack Ma said, the biggest mistake in my life is to establish Alibaba. But before this sentence, there's actually another sentence. I regret that I'm always busy with work and have no time to accompany my family. If I can live again, I definitely won't be like this again. My wife said it well. You're not my person. You belong to Alibaba. The unscrupulous media took the words out of context, causing the meaning of this sentence to completely change. Cultivation is not a matter of time. For immortal cultivators with long lifespans, what did a few years count for? Nian only had one childhood. Why couldn't she be allowed to play happily for a few years without any worries? Chunshi's idea was very good. Unfortunately, a thought was just a thought. When Chunshi embarked on a strange journey to save Ying, the happy life of the family of three was completely shattered. Chunshi considered that he might not be able to stay by Nian's side to protect her. So after hesitating for a while, he personally removed the first layer of the seal on Nian's body. When she turned 12 and 18, the second and third layers of the seal would automatically be removed. If by that time, if Chunshi hadn't come back yet, Qin Yongyan would have told Nian the truth. It was up to her to make her own choices in the future. Let's go back to that damn dark space. Since Chunshi broke the demonic barrier and kept his spiritual altar clear, time had become meaningless to him. There was no spiritual energy here, so breathing seemed to have become a kind of consumption. There wasn't much true qi left in Chunshi's body, so he could only gather the remaining true qi in order to keep his body alive. He hadn't moved for 100 years. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there couldn't be dust. So even if 100 years had passed, Chunshi didn't seem to have changed at all. The only change was, maybe it was a slight change in his demeanor. Chunshi had long been used to everything around him. After experiencing the initial anger and despair, his state of mind had become calmer. Before he saw it with his own eyes, he would never think in a bad way. What Chunshi was going through now was actually very similar to what Robinson was going through, but much more miserable than Robinson. After all, even if Robinson was trapped on an isolated island and didn't have enough food to eat and clothes to cover his body, Robinson still picked up a volleyball to amuse himself. What about Chunshi? Without being able to replenish the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he didn't even dare to move. Deduce a cultivation technique? Could a mere soul formation cultivator deduce and optimize the sky yin divine sex treasured scripture? Try to understand the true meaning of the word void. Without practice, all great ideas were just empty words. Bored, Chunshi could only recall the bits and pieces of the past. Just like watching a TV series, he watched the story about himself over and over again, and every time he watched it, he enjoyed it very much. Whenever he thought of how cute Nian was when she acted coquettishly in front of him, Chunshi's lips would even curl up into a faint smile. To be honest, with Chunshi's current state, his thinking had definitely improved by more than one level. Perhaps this was also a kind of training. Even if he was trapped, Chunshi had to be calm. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. After 200 years of darkness imprisonment, Chunshi's mind didn't collapse, but his body couldn't take it anymore, because his true essence had long been exhausted. Without the support of true essence, there would be a day when the physical body would deteriorate. Once the physical body deteriorated, then Chunshi's soul wouldn't be far from dispersing. After all, this place didn't have a suitable physical body for him to possess. Thinking of this, Chunshi's withered face couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. He persevered for a long time. He really tried his best. If possible, Chunshi hoped that time here would be much slower than the outside world, because only then could he go to the bridge of helplessness and quietly wait for the arrival of his lover. Ying, I'm sorry. At this moment, Chunxi's heart was like dead ashes. He closed his eyes tightly, and the remaining tears flowed out uncontrollably. However, just as Chunxi was floating in the darkness, waiting for death, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was really light. However, the light was very weak, and it seemed to be very far away from Chunxi. Chunxi didn't notice the appearance of this light. As his breath became weaker, the light became brighter and brighter. Finally, Chunxi noticed something strange. He hadn't seen light for more than 100 years. After feeling the abnormality caused by the light shining on his eyelids, Chunxi's eyelids suddenly trembled slightly. Then, he was like a drowning man, twisting madly in the darkness. Chunxi used the last of his strength to open his eyes and saw that the light seemed to be right in front of him. Light! I'm saved! I'm saved! The moment he saw the light, Chunxi's heart suddenly exploded with an extremely strong will to live. He didn't know where he got the strength from, but his body suddenly bounced up, and then he tried his best to run towards the light at the fastest speed. As the light got closer and closer, Chunxi's pupils couldn't help but become bigger and bigger. He was a little excited and a little scared. He was afraid that everything in front of him was an illusion before he died. Thinking of this, Chunxi suddenly closed his eyes and then plunged into the light. By the time Chunxi's body was submerged in the light was like a firework, instantly disappearing from the dark space. But at this moment, in this dark space that imprisoned Chunxi for 200 years, a woman's voice suddenly sounded. He can't die here. The woman seemed to be talking to someone. If Chunxi was still here, he would definitely feel that this woman's voice was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Sure enough, as soon as the woman's voice fell, a man's voice immediately followed. This is the reason for your interference? Do you know what the consequences are? I know. It's good that you know. The conversation came to an abrupt end. In Chunxi's imagination, the great world should be a planet like Earth. But what appeared in front of him now? There were countless floating islands in the void. Just like in the movie Avatar, these floating islands were either big or small. The vegetation on the islands was lush, and they all had a complete ecosystem. In fact, calling it a floating island didn't seem right. To be exact, it should be called a mountain. One mountain range after another floated in the void. After all, the great world was just a small plane in a crack in the void. It couldn't be measured by the common sense of the universe. There was no sun in the great world, and all the light came from the great sun-moon star formation that the Tai Ching divine ancestor had inscribed on the boundary of the plane. Under the illumination of the great sun-moon star formation, the great world had a day and night like Earth. He didn't know how big this space was. With just a cursory glance, Chunxi saw thousands of floating islands of different sizes, and the floating island he was on was considered relatively small. The floating islands were either high or low, and each island was surrounded by immortal clouds. Chunxi listened attentively and found that there were vigorous roars of beasts coming from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a giant golden bird swept past Chunxi's eyes. After grabbing a strange beast the size of an elephant from the forest below him, the giant bird turned around and flew toward another floating island. Such a strange scene was really amazing. This, because Chunxi had just escaped from the dark space, he had a better understanding of it. Thus, Chunxi looked into the distance and set his gaze beyond the group of floating islands, to a place where even the great sun-moon star formation couldn't illuminate. There was nothing but emptiness. It was still that endless darkness. Although there were many floating islands, they couldn't fill up such a huge dark space. This great world, wasn't this the upgraded and expanded version of the dark space? If there were no surprises, this small plane should be similar to the dark space, and there shouldn't be anything in it. After the Tai Ching divine ancestor discovered this plane, he moved countless mountains from somewhere, and that was how the great world became the size it was today. Mountains could be moved, but Where did the rich spirit chi of heaven and earth come from? Chunshi was stunned by the Tai Ching divine ancestor's extravagance. Only now did he realize that his understanding of the Tai Ching divine ancestor was too one-sided. This great figure, who had single-handedly turned the dark space into a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral and saved the ancient cultivators. What level had he reached? Insightful emptiness? Tao integration? Or perhaps the legendary tribulation, true immortal? Chunshi frowned and pondered for a long time. Chapter 415. 3 months passed by in a flash. In order not to be detected, Chunshi plundered large amounts of heaven and earth spirit chi from hundreds of floating islands during this period of time. After all, he was a soul formation cultivator. Now that he was determined to cultivate in seclusion, how could outsiders easily detect him? The only thing that could attract the attention of Tiandu was probably the rate at which the spirit chi on these floating islands was dissipating. Chunshi's heart was always on the soul mirror, so when he was not cultivating, he could not help but take time out to walk around a few times. As a result, he gradually gained a basic understanding of the great world. There were a total of 120,000 floating islands in the great world. If all the floating islands were piled together, the surface area was even larger than the moon, almost the size of Asia. The floating islands were not eternal. Once the heaven and earth spirit chi on the island was exhausted, the floating island would completely lose its vitality and float to the periphery of the floating islands. Chunshi had not figured out the source of the heaven and earth spirit chi for the time being. However, he was sure that the floating islands here were like batteries. After they were used up, they would not immediately become useless. Instead, they would float to the periphery and wait for the heaven and earth spirit chi to slowly recover. As for what kind of method did the floating islands use to recover their spirit chi? Obviously, Chunshi still needed to observe for a while more. Every island had its own ecosystem. Apart from heaven and earth treasures and rare beasts, of course, there were also many descendants of ancient cultivators living here. Chunshi went to a few nearby floating islands, but found that these people were like the Jiang clan, who were holed up in Daiyu Island. They had a clear concept of community, and it could be said that each island did not interfere with the other's business. You're on your island, I'm on mine. Everyone abided by their duties, and it seemed that they would never interact with each other. On this day, after she cultivated for 36 cycles as usual. He let out a deep breath of turbid chi. Although the great world had begun to decline, the density of heaven and earth spirit chi was still comparable to when the tides were surging in the lower realm. Therefore, his true yuan recovered very quickly. Now that he had mostly recovered, he estimated that he would be able to return to his peak state in a few days. And as his condition improved, the strange phenomena caused by she's cultivation also became more and more powerful. Therefore, although the mountain peak he was on was covered by a concealing array, as long as someone stepped into the array, they would be able to see the spiritual energy of heaven and earth swarming towards them like clouds and mist. From afar, it was as if she was sitting at the bottom of a huge funnel, and Bicker was constantly pouring spiritual energy into his body. While she was busy sorting out the true essence in his body, a figure suddenly flew out from the floating island where Tiandu was and arrived above she's floating island in the blink of an eye. She only took a cursory glance and discovered that this person's true essence was thick and his aura was incomparably powerful. He was at least in existence on the same level as Bai Hong. Divine General? In fact, in the 3 months that she had been here, she had discovered a strange thing. Apart from the floating island where Tiandu was, he didn't find any divine general-level cultivators on the other floating islands. This was obviously somewhat illogical. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Although she's overall plan was disrupted by the sudden appearance of the dark space, he still learned the general structure of Tiandu from Bai Hong in advance. First of all, the Celestial Lords of 10 Directions, led by Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, were the core of the entire Tiandu. These 10 people were also the strongest in the big world. Chunshi hadn't fought with a Celestial Lord yet, but from Bai Hong's description, Chunshi could basically conclude that a Celestial Lord should be equivalent to a cultivator at the Divinity Transformation stage. As for whether a Celestial Lord or a Divinity Transformation cultivator was stronger or weaker, this question was obviously only known to Chunshi after he personally fought with one. In addition to the Celestial Lords of 10 Directions, Tiandu also had the Divine Generals of 5 Directions, who were respectively in charge of the East, South, West, North, and Center. There were a total of 36 people, 10 Celestial Lords, and 36 Divine Generals of 5 Directions. In addition, there were 72 Rakshasa Lords whose strength was second only to the Divine Generals, as well as countless Celestial Lords. It wasn't that Chunshi wanted to boost the morale of others and belittle his own prestige, but with Tiandu's strength and foundation, even in the Tiandu domain, it was enough to dominate a region. In the past 3 months, Chunshi hadn't seen any Divine Generals or Celestial Lords, so he gradually became a little uneasy. Could it be Tiandu had already built a soul bridge and went to the lower realm? Every time he thought of this, Chunshi couldn't help but worry in his heart and was very eager to go to Tiandu to see the situation. But considering that his cultivation had not yet recovered, and that he would definitely not end well if he stood out, Chunshi could only forcibly suppress this terrible thought. 200 years had passed, and there was no point in being anxious. Therefore, Chunshi had even prepared for the worst.